Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something a little grim and a little gritty. And honestly, you probably won't survive this. We're talking about winter. But not just any winter. The kind that arrives when you're living in the Middle Ages, when the term cosy hasn't been invented yet, and insulation might as well be a wizard's spell. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Seriously. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is, because I love seeing where all of you are tuning in around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up before the sun even thinks about rising. Cold isn't just an inconvenience, it's a full-body occupation. The air is so sharp it feels like it could flay skin. Your breath fogs the darkness above you, curling like spirit smoke in the rafters of the single room you share with your entire family. It's not much of a house, wattle and daub walls patched with whatever could be scraped together during warmer months, a thatched roof that leaks when it snows too hard, and a floor that's more dirt than anything else. That same dirt floor that, in the dead of January, turns into something between cement and frozen stew. Cold seeps upward through your thin straw mattress straight into your bones. There's no glass in the windows, only oiled parchment or shutters if you're lucky, and those do little to stop the wind from slicing through every crack. The fire in the hearth died sometime in the early morning and nobody dared get up in the dark to feed it. Why would they? The firewood's almost gone, and you're supposed to make it last another 6 weeks, minimum. Instead, your father pulls a wool cloak over his head, grunts something unintelligible, and rolls toward the wall. Your mother is already stirring, pulling the younger sibling toward her chest for warmth. The baby's nose is red, and he's wheezing, just a cold, hopefully. You sit up, or try to, your joints are stiff, your fingers feel twice their size, clumsy and slow. Your breath comes out in puffs you could almost catch, and you can see frost rimming the inside of the wooden door. You know that outside the land is white and silent, blanketed in snow that will eventually turn to brown and patchy and crusted with ice like old bread. Right now, though, it's freshly fallen and beautiful in that cruel, untouched way that reminds you nature doesn't care whether you make it through February. Your first job of the day, rekindle the fire. It's a desperate, near-sacred act. You dig beneath the cold ash for the hint of red, an ember stubborn enough to hold on. If it's there, you blow gently, feeding it with wisps of hay or a twist of dried moss. If it's not, well, you'll have to trudge to the neighbours with your frozen fingers, ask for a coal, and feel the quiet shame of being the family who let the fire die. Again, it's not just pride. Fire is life. No fire means no warmth, no food, no safety from the black, teeth-baring night. Once the hearth's going, crackling with weak heat, you hang a pot of water over it. Water fetched yesterday, probably, because hauling it from the half-frozen stream this early is just not happening. You heat it not to drink, but to thaw your hands enough to do the rest of what needs doing. Because surviving a medieval winter isn't about hibernating, it's about grinding through the cold like a worm through hard soil. Your clothing is the same you've worn for weeks. A wool tunic layered over a linen shirt, thick hose, a belt with a knife, and maybe a pair of leather boots that have seen too many winters and not enough repairs. If you're lucky, you have a sheepskin cloak that smells like everything it's ever absorbed. Smoke, sweat, wet dog and ancient hay. Everything's scratchy, everything's heavy, and nothing actually keeps you dry. Once the snow melts against your shoulders, it soaks in. Damp clothing in winter? That's a gamble. People don't just get colds, they get lung rot, ague, or worse. There's a general belief floating around that winter is beautiful, peaceful. That's modern thinking. In the medieval world, winter is a threat with a long, slow fuse. It's not the romantic quiet of falling snow. It's the silence of buried fields, frozen wells, and no second chances. You're constantly thinking about supplies. You eye your family's stores, a sack of turnips, some dried beans, a few salted fish, maybe smoked pork if you're high on the village food chain. There's a root cellar, sure, but that's more of a wish list than a treasure trove, and the bread is getting tough enough to injure someone if thrown. Outside, the world is muffled. Snow hushes everything. The only sounds are the occasional crow and the distant creak of trees under the weight of frost. You step out into that stillness to do your first chore, checking on the livestock. The cows and goats are huddled in the byre, which is just a smaller, even colder shed built next to your house. If they freeze, you lose milk. If they die, you lose everything. You whisper to them as you open the latch, as much for your own comfort as theirs. One of the goats sneezes. That's probably fine. Probably. You break the ice in their water trough with a chunk of firewood and scatter handfuls of hay you stashed in the loft last autumn. You remember that winter 2 years ago when the hay ran out early, and your family had to choose between feeding the animals or feeding yourselves. That year, the stew tasted suspiciously meaty come mid-February. And here's a weird little fact. People believed that winter air itself was dangerous. Not just cold, but foul, almost evil. Bad air could make you sick. Scholars argued over whether winter fog carried invisible demons or just bad humours. The debate was never settled, but you still hold your breath a little when the mist coils in low across the fields. You head back inside, already tired. Your nose is numb, your fingers ache, and your stomach grumbles for food that isn't porridge again. But the day is just beginning. Surviving a medieval winter isn't about enduring one big disaster. It's about facing tiny daily miseries one after another without giving up. You close the door behind you and the wind slaps it back like it's offended. You latch it again, this time using a bit of twine. The fire crackles faintly. Your mother hands you a bowl. It's warm. That alone is a small miracle. You eat in silence, watching the frost creep along the inside of the shutters. You've never known a world with central heating, but sometimes you dream about one. You imagine a room where warmth pours from the walls, where floors aren't just frozen earth, and where your breath doesn't hang in the air like ghost vapour every time you exhale. But in this life, your life, heat is earned. It's chopped, stacked, dried, rationed, begged o'er, and fiercely guarded. You wrap your arms around yourself, trying to remember what it felt like to be warm all the way through. You can't. It's like a distant memory from another life. Your home is not a place that holds in heat. It's more of a glorified wind tunnel with furniture. The moment the fire starts to die down, even a little, the cold sneaks back in like an opportunistic thief. Curls beneath the door, drips from the ceiling, slithers across the floor. No corner is safe. You learn to live in layers, linen against your skin, then wool, more wool, and if you're lucky, some fur or a thick felted cloak over that. The poor wear whatever they can stitch together, sometimes literally sewing cloth to their skin, because it's the only way it'll stay on when the thread runs out. And this is where the real fun begins. Even with all that, you're still cold. Not chilly, cold. Numb fingers, aching toes, the kind of pain that settles deep and becomes background noise. You feel it most when you take something off. Gloves to wash your hands, boots to change your socks, and the cold rushes in like it's been waiting for an invitation. You clench your teeth and pretend it's fine, but it isn't. It never is. Here's the thing. Humans weren't built for this. Not really. Not without help. And yet somehow you, along with your village, keep staggering through winters with nothing more than thick clothes, a few fires, and the sheer stubborn refusal to die. Everyone around you becomes a student of warmth. You learn what materials keep the cold out, fur if you can afford it, what kind of wood burns longest, oak if you can find it, and how to sleep with your legs twisted just right to trap body heat beneath a shared blanket. At night, the temperature drops even lower, and your body becomes a negotiation. You curl against your sibling like a human spoon. If you're on the outside, you become the designated frost shield, absorbing the ambient misery so that someone else can maybe get some sleep. It's miserable. You try to rotate, but someone always cheats. There's no privacy, no space. You sleep fully clothed, and you don't wash often, because water has to be heated, and firewood is precious. You start to stink, but no one cares. Everyone does. It's a shared misery, like living in a wool-scented armpit. Even the rich can't escape all of it. Sure, nobles have bigger fires and finer clothes, maybe even fur-lined cloaks imported from some warmer country you'll never see. But their castles? Giant stone freezers. The walls don't breathe. They hold the cold like a grudge. Tapestries are meant to insulate, not just look pretty, and servants constantly run around feeding fires in every room. The truly wealthy might have a bed with curtains, not for stole, but to trap breath-warmed air around their bodies at night. But even then, fingers turn blue and noses drip. Cold is the great equalizer. It doesn't care about titles. And then there's the weird stuff people start believing when they live half-frozen for months on end. There's a tale passed down in whispers that in extreme cold, your soul can slip from your body during sleep. People who die in their sleep are said to have wandered out and gotten lost. You don't entirely believe it, but you don't not believe it either. After all, your uncle fell asleep near a dead hearth one night and never woke up. You were 5. He looked peaceful, they said, like he'd gone walking in a dream and simply forgot the way back. Even the animals suffer. Your dog, if you're lucky enough to have one, shakes in his sleep, curled up at your feet. Cats crowd the hearth and hiss if you try to move them. The chickens are feathered ice lumps in the corner, puffed up and miserable. Sometimes a pig or two gets moved inside, not for fun, but because it's cheaper to share body heat with a pig than to let it freeze and lose the meat. You learn to ignore the smells, or maybe you just stop noticing them after a while. There's something else you've started to notice, though. Your fingers are slower these days. Your joints ache more. You can't help but think about old Agneta, the widow who froze to death last winter. She couldn't chop wood anymore, and no one offered. Not because they were cruel, but because they were tired. Everyone is tired. Cold makes people selfish. Cold steals generosity. You want to be kind, but your muscles tremble just lifting the wood axe. You're 15 and already hunched like someone twice your age. There's a debate that floats among the village elders. Was winter always this harsh, or has something changed? Some say the world is tilting, the sun growing lazy. Others mutter about divine punishment, sins that grow icicles. And then there are those strange travellers, the ones with bright eyes and parchment maps, who talk about a little ice age, some global shift in weather that no one understands. Most people just mutter and spit, doesn't matter what you call it. It still means your toes are turning black. Sometimes when the sky's clear and the wind settles, you allow yourself a moment outside. The snow sparkles in moonlight. Trees crack and groan like they're talking in their sleep. It's quiet in a way that feels ancient, like the world is holding its breath. It's beautiful, until your ears start to sting. You hurry back inside, cheeks raw, and pile more hay near the hearth to dry your socks. No one talks about it much, but you all know, deep down, that winter kills. Not with storms or wolves or dramatic disasters, but slowly, patiently, it waits, it watches. It chips away at your strength, your food stores, your spirit. And you endure it. Because there's no other option. Because every night you survive is a small victory carved from ice. You pull your blanket tighter and press closer to the fire. Tomorrow will be just as cold, maybe colder. You try not to think about it. Instead, you watch the flames and let your eyes blur. The hearth is the only part of your home that glows. It's not much, a shallow stone or clay basin at the centre or side of the room, maybe with a crude iron pot swinging from a hook, but it's the heart of everything. Without it, you're finished. It cooks your food, dries your socks, boils your water, and holds back the night. You guard it like a dragon hoarding gold, only instead of riches, it's embers you stare at. Little coals the colour of sunset, the last warm thing in your whole world. You start the day with it and end the night staring into it, sometimes seeing faces in the flames. Not real ones, probably. Your neighbour swears her husband saw the devil in the fire once, just sitting there smiling. But that's the kind of thing people say when they're stir-crazy from 6 weeks of indoor misery. Firelight can play tricks, especially when it's the only light you've seen in days. You know how long firewood lasts by smell. Dried oak burns slow and sweet, pine burns fast and spits. And if you're truly desperate, you'll burn anything, old tools, bits of furniture, even dried animal dung. You've done it before, everyone has, no one brags about it, but when you catch a whiff of that smoky barnyard reek from another house, you give them a nod. Not judgment, solidarity. The fire's heat only reaches so far, you learn the circle of comfort, that invisible radius around the flames where fingers thaw and cheeks unfreeze. Step outside that radius and the air slaps you back into cold reality. You fight for the warm spot, you share it, yes, but only with people who deserve it, like the baby or someone who spent the morning hauling ice from the well. Everyone else waits their turn or huddles in a cloak like a sad, smoky burrito. By now you know all the tricks. Put hot stones in your boots, warm a brick and wrap it in cloth to stick under your blanket. Dry your socks near the fire, not too close or they'll smoke, and you'll have to listen to your mother's lecture on how smoke means wasted cloth. She's right, of course. Cloth is precious, everything is. Every log you burn is one less day you can survive. Every stick you throw on the hearth is a little bargain. Warmth now, hunger later. You remember stories of people dying in their sleep, not because they froze exactly, but because they burned the last of their wood too fast. A few nights of comfort, they're nothing. That's a death you can plan for. Fire discipline, they call it. though no one calls anything discipline out loud. That sounds too formal. It's just what you do. You ration, you plan, you suffer a little now to suffer less later. Not all fires are made equal either. You have to learn the shape of a good one. Too much wood too fast and it eats itself into nothing. Too little and it smoulders, spitting smoke that chokes the room and makes the baby cough. You've got the timing down to a science. First a twist of kindling, then a finger-thick log, then maybe a split branch when the flames catch. It takes practice, it takes patience, and it takes luck too, because sometimes, even with all that, the fire dies anyway. You poke at it, you plead, but it doesn't care. Some families build their entire winter rhythm around the fire schedule. Morning fire to melt the frost off the walls. Midday fire to cook the one hot meal everyone gets. Evening fire to keep the dark from swallowing the room. Then it burns low overnight, just barely enough to keep the edge off. You fall asleep to the sound of it crackling softly, and you wake when it stops, or when you can see your breath above your face. There's one room, one fire, one everything. Everyone's always in the same space, sleeping, eating, arguing, shivering, all in one smoky box made of mud and straw and pure stubborn hope. Privacy doesn't exist. You learn to ignore each other's noises. You know the sound of your father's boots as he stomps them by the hearth to thaw. The sniff your sister makes before she coughs. The sound of someone shivering in the dark and trying not to cry because they've realised the frost reached their shoes overnight. And you start to notice the fire changes people. Not just because it warms them, but because it becomes the thing they measure life by. How much wood do we have becomes more urgent than, how are you? You could be missing a hand and still get asked, did you feed the fire before you came inside? You could be crying and someone will just hand you a stick and nod toward the flames. There's comfort in that, in its terrible simplicity. Quirky fact for the night. In some parts of medieval Europe, people believed that certain trees made fires that could ward off evil spirits. Hawthorn, ash, even rowan, burning. Those meant your home was safe. Not warm, not comfortable, just safe. Which, in winter, is sometimes the best you can ask for. Of course, the scholars still argue over whether all this fire dependency made people more superstitious. Some say yes. When your life depends on something that dances and flickers and sometimes dies for no reason, you start seeing gods in it. Others say the opposite. People got practical, stopped believing in miracles, and learned to trust in wood, not wonders. You don't know what's true. You just know that when the fire's healthy, everyone feels a little more alive. But there are bad days. Days when the fire barely catches, when the wind howls through the eaves and tries to pull the smoke back into the room, when the chimney's clogged and you have to burn low or not at all. Those are the days you huddle in your cloak all day and pray for something, anything to change, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes all you can do is hold your hands toward the weak flames and pretend it's enough. By evening, the fire's burned low again. You scrape the ash into a neat pile and bank the coals with a few scraps of bark and moss, hoping they'll still be warm by dawn. You pile extra straw over your feet, wrap your fingers in cloth and tuck your face into your collar. You close your eyes and try to imagine heat. Not fire, but sun, a breeze that smells like grass, not smoke. The sound of water moving, not freezing. The last thing you see before sleep is the glow of the embers, red, pulsing alive. The only thing in this house that dares to shine. There's a saying whispered half-jokingly in the village. A full pantry is a full belly, but an empty one makes you pray harder. And right now, as you eye the corner where your food stores are dwindling, you're starting to get religious. Not the tidy, hymn-singing kind, but the deep, gnawing, please don't let us run out before the thaw kind. Because you know exactly how long a sack of oats lasts, how many meals you can stretch from a salted rabbit, and what happens when the pickled vegetables grow a little too fuzzy to be considered edible. You never thought you'd miss the taste of turnips, but here you are, grating one into a pot like it's a delicacy. It's been hanging in the cellar for months, tough as an old boot and twice as fragrant. Still, it's food, well, almost food. You throw in a chunk of dried onion and a bit of smoked pork rind, just enough to tease the ire of meat. No one gets full-on stew, but it's hot, and hot counts for something. You take your time stirring, watching the slop bubble like it's doing something magical. Spoiler, it's not. The thing is, medieval winters aren't just cold, they're hungry. If you didn't work like a mule in the harvest months, squirreling away every root, drying every herb, salting and smoking every scrap of meat, then winter turns from unpleasant to unlivable real fast. You think back to October, hauling sacks of barley, packing apples in straw, cramming shelves with jars of pickled cabbage and beets, salting fish like your life depended on it. Because it did. Now all that's left are the stubborn survivors. Root vegetables that look like they've been in a fist fight, dried beans hard enough to chip teeth, and some shriveled apples you're almost afraid to cut open. There's no such thing as fresh. That's a summer luxury. You haven't seen green in weeks, maybe a hint of mould, but not green the way plants are green. No crisp lettuce, no juicy pears, just things that don't rot easily, or things you're willing to eat after they've rotted slightly. You dream of bread, fresh bread. But what you've got is more like a weapon than a meal. Heavy, blackened loaves made months ago, stored on high shelves to keep away the mice. They've gone rock hard, and the only way to eat them is to soak them in stew until they give up and turn into something vaguely chewable. You've broken more knives than you can count trying to cut through winter bread. The pigs wouldn't touch it if you still had pigs. Speaking of pigs, you still remember the slaughter. Every family has their own ritual, but it's always around November, before the freeze sets in and you can't feed them anymore. It's not pretty, not clean, but it's meat, and that meat gets packed in salt and hung in the rafters to dry, or smoked over low fires until it's more bark than flesh. You eat it slice by slice, carefully rationed. One piece for the stew, one for special days, and one, just one, you keep hidden for when someone's sick. You never know when you'll need a miracle. Here's the quirky part. Sometimes you actually enjoy it. Not the hunger, but the weird, quiet satisfaction of knowing you've made it another day on food you fought to keep. There's a kind of pride in rationing. You stretch a week's worth of grain into 10 days. You cut your potatoes thinner, scrape the pot cleaner. You make tea out of dried nettles and lie to yourself about its nutritional value. You become an expert in enough to fill the stomach, enough to hold off the cold, enough to pretend. Of course, not everyone makes it. Every winter, someone doesn't. You hear the whispers when a family goes quiet. First, fewer footsteps in the snow. Then someone finds their door open a little too long, the fire out, and the house oddly still. Starvation doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just sets in, slows people down until they stop getting up at all. You try not to think about it, but you notice your neighbour's son hasn't been seen in a few days, and his mother looked thinner last time you passed her. Too thin, the kind of thin that says they've been giving all their food to the little ones. Scholars still argue whether medieval people knew much about nutrition. Some say they understood enough. Eat grains, get some meat, avoid spoiled stuff. Others believe most of it was guesswork, based more on superstition than science, like the idea that onions could ward off disease, or that fasting helped the soul as much as the body. You're not a scholar. You just know what keeps your belly from groaning and your limbs moving. And if you're really lucky, if things haven't gotten too grim, you might still have honey. It's the gold of the food stores, a sweet, viscous escape from the taste of old grain and pickled sadness. A spoonful of it can change everything. Mask the bitterness, bribe a child, even dress a wound if the healer's too far off. Honey keeps. It doesn't freeze. It doesn't rot. You almost worship it. Almost. When meals are short, you fall back on ritual. There's a rhythm to the hunger. Breakfast, hot water with a splash of beer or wine, maybe a crust if you're lucky. Midday is your big chance, stew, bread, maybe a boiled egg if you haven't eaten them all. Dinner is lighter, more hot water, maybe thin porridge, you don't snack, you don't nibble. Every bite is intentional. Sometimes you dream of feasts, real ones. You've heard nobles eat roast goose with apples and sugar, thick cream, pies stuffed with venison and cherries. It sounds like fairy tales. You wonder if it even exists, or if the whole thing was made up just to keep peasants like you dreaming. But here's the thing. Dreaming doesn't fill your stomach. So you go back to stirring the pot, scraping the bottom, licking the spoon, and hoping tomorrow brings something more than pickled beets and bark-hard bread. And still, you survive. Because that's what this winter demands. Not luxury, not satisfaction, but survival. You eat what's there, ration what remains, and hope that spring arrives before your pantry echoes like an empty drum. You wake up needing to pee, which is probably the cruelest thing that can happen to you in the dead of a medieval winter night. There's no chamber pot in your house. Those are for the fancier homes with the money to afford such luxuries or the sense to keep one handy. In your case, the toilet is a wooden bench with a hole carved into it, sitting above a pit behind the house. Charming, right? And if you want to use it, you're going to have to get out of your relatively warm cocoon of scratchy wool blankets and brave the freezing air outside. The bladder waits for no one. At first, you try ignoring it, bargaining with your body, curling tighter beneath the blanket, and telling yourself maybe you can hold it until morning. You can't. So, with a groan, you peel back the covers and instantly regret everything. Your breath condenses in a cloud, and the air against your skin feels like a slap from an angry snow spirit. Your boots are stiff with cold and damp from yesterday's snow. You shove your feet into them anyway. No time for socks. You fumble for your cloak and wrap it around yourself as tightly as possible before slipping out the door, bracing for the impact of that first lungful of open air. And there it is. Your lungs seize. The wind hits like a blade, slicing through your layers and stinging your cheeks. You squint against the flurry of snow still falling. Great, it's snowing again. The outhouse is 20 steps from your door. 20 miserable, bitter steps through ankle-deep snow. The ground is uneven, a mix of ice crust and slush. Your foot slips once, and your knee slams into the frozen earth. You swear, loudly, breath fogging out like steam from a kettle. But you're up again, limping the rest of the way to that sad wooden shack that offers no real protection from the elements, but is somehow still better than doing your business indoors. Inside, it's a different kind of awful. The stink hits first, a mix of waste and rot and something unidentifiable that has probably been fermenting since late autumn. The seat, if you can even call it that, is dusted with frost. You do what you need to do in record time, shivering and muttering curses under your breath. You keep your eyes fixed on the wall because looking down is never a good idea. The cold touches parts of your body that should never know cold, and you're briefly convinced you might never feel warm again. There's no wiping with anything soft. If you remember to bring straw, congrats. If not, it's snow. Yes, actual snow. You dig a handful from a drift near the door and brace for impact. You'll never forget the first time you learnt that trick. You were 8. It was February, and the shriek you let out scared the chickens. Quirky side note, some families actually used old bits of cloth, rags washed and reused, but during the dead of winter, washing isn't an option unless you want your hands to freeze in a bucket. So snow it is. Nature's icy toilet paper. Now comes the awkward part, the return. Your fingers are too stiff to properly refasten anything, so you stumble back toward the house with your cloak foot flapping, boots squelching, and your pride left behind in the outhouse somewhere. The wind has picked up. Snowflakes sting your face. You trudge past the shed, where you can hear the goat shifting inside, probably judging you. When you finally get back inside, the door sticks from the swelling of the wood. You slam your shoulder into it and collapse through, panting like you've just survived a battle. Which in a way you have. Your family doesn't stir, this is normal. You wrap yourself in a blanket, teeth chattering, and inch back toward the fire, which has burned down to a dull orange whisper. You stare at the coals, wondering again how this has become your life. There's no toilet humour in the Middle Ages, it's all toilet tragedy. Going to relieve yourself shouldn't feel like a pilgrimage through the ninth circle of hell. But here we are. You wonder how nobles did it, those rich folk with stone castles and heavy tapestries. Then you remember, they had chamber pots, and servants to empty them, into the moat probably. It gets worse if you're sick. Say you have stomach cramps from bad meat or fever sweats that leave you dizzy and half-conscious. Too bad, you still have to go out. No one's making you a bedpan. If you're lucky, someone holds your arm and guides you to the outhouse. If not, well, accidents happen. And then you're dealing with frozen, soiled clothing and the kind of shame that never quite washes out. There's an open debate among bored scholars and historical reenactors, not that you know what those are, about whether medieval people even used outhouses regularly. Some say the open fields and woods were more common. Others insist pit latrines were the norm. In the village, the answer is whatever's closest and doesn't get you yelled at by the neighbours. There's not a lot of room for nuance when your butt's freezing. Every few days, someone gets the thankless job of emptying the pit. It's usually the youngest son, or the man who lost a bet. Armed with a bucket, a stick, and a nose stuffed with wool soaked in vinegar, he goes in, scoops out the horrors below, and carts them off to the dung heap. Sometimes it's used to fertilise fields in spring, because, yes, you really do eat next year's potatoes with the help of this year's misery. And if the pit freezes, oh, then you're in for a special kind of awful. The waste stacks up above the surface, a grotesque sculpture of bodily betrayal. You have to chip it down with a shovel just to make space. It's not glamorous. It's barely survivable, but it's the job, and someone has to do it. Tonight, you're grateful it wasn't you. You just had to pee. That's a mercy. You're finally warm again, sort of. The fire is catching with a few added twigs, and your skin stopped tingling from the cold, and Your nose is still running though, and your feet feel like two soggy stones. Still, you made it through the most annoying and undignified part of winter survival. Tomorrow you'll do it again, maybe twice. You try not to think about it. Just another part of life where dignity goes to die one shivering midnight sprint at a time. You'd think that once the fire is lit, the food is simmering, and the outhouse disaster is behind you, you could finally rest. But no, winter doesn't stop just because you're tired. In fact, winter seems to get some kind of sadistic thrill out of keeping you busy. There are chores to do, always. And unlike the lazy golden hours of summer, when you can stretch tasks over a whole sunny day, winter demands speed, focus, and numb fingers that fumble everything you touch. The cold doesn't pause for anyone. Not for children, not for the elderly, not for you. You step outside again, boots still damp, to fetch water. Why? Because the pot's nearly empty and someone needs to drink, wash, or make more of that thick gruel everyone pretends is soup. There's no magic tap waiting to pour out fresh steaming water. Your village has a well, and if it hasn't frozen solid yet, you count yourself among the lucky. Still, the water sits below a thick sheet of ice you'll need to break. You grab a rusted iron rod used for just this purpose, hike up your stiff tunic, and prepare for the kind of full-body shiver that only early morning frost can deliver. The ice cracks with a high, brittle shriek, and you haul up the rope, muscles trembling as the water bucket emerges. You spill some, of course. Everyone does. But you save enough. Every drop matters. The rope's wet and freezes to your gloves almost instantly, which means you'll spend the next few minutes carefully peeling them off like a particularly dumb onion. You curse under your breath. Again, normal. On your way back, you notice something odd. The chicken coop door is ajar. That's not good. Chickens aren't the brightest creatures in summer, but in winter they'll huddle in corners and freeze solid if they're exposed. You approach slowly and peer inside. Yep, just as you feared. 2 birds are already dead, lying stiff and silent on the straw-covered floor, tiny beaks frosted over. Another stares at you with wide, stupid eyes, perched on top of a third one, which is also probably dead. You scoop the survivors up under one arm and close the door behind you, shoving a stick through the latch for good measure. The dead ones? There'll be dinner tonight, no matter how stringy. Chores multiply. If it's not the chickens, it's the goats. If it's not the goats, it's the firewood pile, boy, already shrinking faster than it should. Your brother swears someone's been sneaking logs from it at night, which honestly wouldn't surprise you. Desperation makes neighbours dishonest. You don't blame them, not really. You might do the same if your own hearth was dead and your kids' lips had turned blue. You still have to haul feed to the animals, even though the bags feel heavier with every passing week. They need water too, which means thawing out frozen troughs with hot water or poking holes in the ice so they can drink. If you let them go thirsty too long, they'll weaken. And weak animals don't make it through March. Here's the cruel reality of winter. Your body starts to slow down just when the chores get harder. Your joints ache. Your skin cracks at the knuckles. You get nosebleeds from the dry air and headaches from smoke build-up when the wind pushes chimney smoke back into the house. The tips of your fingers are raw, bruised and weirdly purple in places. You joke that you're turning into a corpse early. Your sister doesn't laugh. There's a rhythm to it though. Wake up, check the fire, feed the animals, fetch water, haul wood, scrape frost from the windows, clear snow from the doorway, boil something, fix something, worry about something. By the time it's mid-morning, you're exhausted and still have half the day to go. Resting isn't really an option unless you're willing to fall behind, and falling behind is how people disappear. And here's the fun fringe fact. There were medieval work calendars, like actual illustrations, that showed peasants working in every season. But winter, that's when they showed people relaxing, sitting by the fire, roasting meat, drinking, laughing. Scholars still puzzle over that. Was it propaganda, wishful thinking? Or were those noble artists just completely disconnected from how the bottom 99% actually lived? You have your own answer. Winter work isn't glamorous. It's not even visible half the time. It's the slow grinding maintenance of not dying. There are no festivals for hauling slush out of the goat pen or scraping mould off turnips. No ballads about breaking ice so your mother can wash her hands. Just the endless rhythm of cold and repetition, and through it all your body betrays you. You've noticed your back hurts more than usual. A strange, deep ache like something's come loose inside. You ignore it. Everyone does. If you stopped to acknowledge every twinge, you'd collapse. Instead, you carry on, gritting your teeth through the frost-numbed mornings and the long grey afternoons. There's a strange peace to it, though, if you let yourself sink into the rhythm. You catch yourself watching the way smoke curls from the chimneys around the village, counting the puffs, guessing which homes still have wood and which are burning anything they can get their hands on. You watch the sun inch across the sky, not rising exactly, more like reluctantly showing its face before ducking away again. Daylight feels precious. Even if you spend most of it working, there's something about seeing the sky that reminds you the world still exists beyond these cold little chores. You finish your water hauling, brush snow off your sleeves and stand in the yard, your boots buried up to the ankles in slush. There's a kind of stillness that settles in your chest. Not calm, not content, but something close to acceptance. This is winter, not the snow globe fantasy, not the carols and candles, the real one. The one that comes with sweat and blisters and smoke-stung eyes. You trudge back inside with numb legs and a bucket of half-frozen water. Someone hands you a crust of bread. You take it without thinking and chew slowly, steam from the hearth rising in ribbons beside your face. The chores are done for now. You'll have to do them all again tomorrow. But for the next hour, you're still. Your hands rest. The fire crackles. And for a little while, you let yourself believe that's enough. You spend most of your life believing nobles have it easier, and in a lot of ways, you're right. They don't chop their own wood, they don't haul their own water or milk their own goats or scrub their own breeches, their hands are smoother, their clothes are finer, and they're a whole lot less likely to die of frostbite in the middle of the night. But then you hear stories, see glimpses, even occasionally find yourself standing inside the outer walls of one of their manors or castles, and you realise their winters are different, sure, but not always better. Let's talk about castles. Big, impressive, made of stone castles. They look like fortresses from a distance, but up close in winter, they are basically massive refrigerators with banners. Stone doesn't insulate. It holds cold like it's collecting a debt. During the summer, those thick walls keep things pleasantly cool, but in winter, they suck in the cold and exhale it in your face like an angry troll. Even in a lord's hall, you'll see nobles huddled beside massive hearths the size of carts, bundled in fur and drinking hot wine like it's the only thing keeping their souls from freezing inside their rib cages. But they do have something you don't. Space. And that space is a double-edged sword. Sure, a noble family might have separate rooms with actual beds, maybe even mattresses stuffed with feathers instead of hay. But all that space means more coal to fight, more fireplaces to feed, more drafts sneaking through arrow slits and under thick ornate doors, more stone floors that leach the warmth right out of your feet the moment your slippers slip off. You've heard the stories, how the nobility would even sleep with dogs in their beds for warmth. Not tiny lap dogs either. We're talking massive drooling hunting hounds, not for companionship, but because they are basically living hot water bottles that sometimes fart. And they weren't the only ones sharing space. Servants, squires, pages, they all piled together near fires in the servant quarters or curled up behind tapestry-draped walls anywhere that trapped a sliver of heat. Meanwhile you, peasant-class hero that you are, might not have feather beds or tapestries, but at least your one-room cottage keeps the warmth where you sleep. It's chaotic, smelly, crowded, but intimate. The fire is close, the bodies are closer, and the heat, once gathered, doesn't have a chance to drift down some echoing hallway into a chapel no one's used since October. Here's a lesser-known and delightfully weird fact. In some medieval castles, people would actually wear their bedclothes around the halls. Literally. Nobles would walk around wrapped in fur-lined sleeping cloaks, looking like overdressed ghosts. Getting fully undressed to sleep was a risk few were willing to take. If your fire went out in the middle of the night and you were naked, you didn't just wake up shivering, you might not wake up at all. So no, being a noble didn't mean comfort. It just meant a different kind of struggle. And sometimes even more absurd expectations, because while you're outside breaking the ice off the goat's water trough, nobles are throwing feasts. Yes, even in the dead of winter. They've got their dried apples, their salted venison, their spice imports from halfway across the known world, and they feel the need to show them off. Big roaring fires, roasted boars and long tables covered in candle wax and cold meat. And just behind the curtain, servants freezing their butts off, sweating through layers of wool, trying not to spill gravy on a lord's velvet sleeves. The class divide gets colder in winter. You see it more clearly. While your stew is thinning, theirs is thickened with butter. While your boots crack and leak, theirs are trimmed with fur. While you worry about surviving until spring, they worry about whether their wine cellar is properly stocked for a midwinter banquet. Still, there are overlaps. The cold doesn't care about titles. Nobles catch colds too, their lips turn blue if the fire goes out. Their babies cough in the dark just like yours. There's a scholarly debate that pops up sometimes, whether noble women suffered more than peasant women in the cold months. On one hand, they had better clothes, maybe more help, definitely fewer outdoor chores. But they were also corseted, restricted and stuffed into rooms with no authority to move or dress freely. Imagine freezing in silk while not being allowed to leave your room without an escort. Warm perhaps, but not free. Meanwhile, your sister, barefoot and frostbitten, gets to climb trees and chase pigs if she wants to. Which she doesn't, because she's not an idiot. Noble kids didn't have it much better either. You picture some lordling shivering in a draughty tower chamber, his tutor droning on about Latin while his ink freezes in the pot. You imagine the girl from the manor house, bundled in 12 layers of linen and wool, trying to walk through corridors so cold her breath fogs the inside of her veil. They might not be out hauling water, but winter makes everyone its punching bag eventually. Sometimes you find yourself near the castle grounds, delivering firewood maybe, or being dragged along with your father to pay rent on the land. And as you step inside the outer gates, the chill somehow deepens. Not colder exactly, but heavier. Like the castle breathes in winter and exhales something ancient. Stone towers rhymed with frost, torchlight barely keeping pace with the dark. Everything echoes. Even laughter sounds like it's wrapped in wool. Still, you admit, there's something about it. The illusion of power, the smell of spiced wine and roasted meats, the flickering light from chandeliers too high to reach. For a second you forget about the outhouse and the cracked knuckles and the goat that's probably chewing on your laundry right now. You let yourself imagine what it would be like to live here, but then you look at the servants lining the walls, shivering under their liveried coats, and you remember. Warmth in this world is a currency, and you don't have enough coin to buy it here. So you return to your cottage, to your fire, your family, your one-room life. It's not glamorous, it's barely tolerable, but it's yours. And when the wind howls through the village and the snow beats on the roof, you at least know that every inch of your little space is fighting with you, not against you. The nobles can keep their stone walls and draughty towers. You'll take smoke in your lungs and pigs in your kitchen over marble floors and silk gloves any day. Every day you wear the same outfit, not because you like it or because it's particularly flattering, but because it's the only thing you've got that stands between you and a frostbitten early grave. Medieval winter fashion isn't about making a statement. It's about survival. If your clothes make a statement at all, it's probably something like, "Please don't let me freeze to death today." And so far, they've done a decent job of it, though you're starting to suspect your left foot has stopped being on speaking terms with your toes. Layering is the name of the game. You start with a linen shirt. If it's clean, congratulations, that's a festival. Then comes the wool tunic, the scratchy miracle fabric of the age. It's coarse, smells faintly of damp sheep, and it never quite stops being itchy. But it insulates when wet, which is essential when snow is constantly trying to sneak under your collar and into your boots. Over that, you've got a cloak, wool again, or maybe something with fur trim if you're fancy or just exceptionally lucky. Some folks even sew rabbit pelts to the inside for extra warmth, creating an entire portable ecosystem of warmth, smell, and potential fleas. You tie it all down with a belt made of leather so stiff it could double as a snow scraper. The belt isn't for fashion, it's to hold your knife, maybe a pouch, maybe a lucky charm or a length of rope. Your boots, stiff leather, worn thin in places, stuffed with straw or bits of wool to plug the gaps. You learned early that snow will find even the tiniest hole and melt straight into your socks, which then freeze into stiff foot armour you get to stomp around in for the rest of the day. Gloves are a rare treat. If you have them, they're probably fingerless or so poorly stitched they fall apart every few weeks and get resewn with thread made from old twine. Mittens are a smarter option, but also a sign of your mother's patience. Knitting takes time, and time in winter is in short supply. Hats are essential. You might wear a felt cap pulled down over your ears or a hood sewn into your cloak. Either way, you look like a slightly disgruntled monk and you're fine with that. Vanity dies around the same time the first frost hits. You watch people shuffle around the village like wool-covered wraiths. Everyone becomes some version of a bundle. Kids disappear entirely inside layers until their arms stick out like stiff wings. Elders wrap themselves in cloaks so many times that they look like rolled carpets that mutter. No one looks good. That's not the point. The point is not dying. Now, here's the annoying part. Despite all this layering, you're still wet. Snow melts, breath condenses, sweat freezes, everything's damp all the time, There's no Gore-Tex, no waterproof outer layer, just thick fabric that soaks, sags, and slowly chills you to the marrow. You dry your clothes by the fire each night, but they're never truly dry. They smell like smoke and mould and whatever you stepped in earlier that day, which may or may not have been goose droppings. No one asks, no one cares. You've developed a kind of sixth sense for which garments are dry enough to risk wearing and which will turn your armpits into cold soup by midday. It's an ugly science, and everyone has their own method. Some people swear by rotating cloaks. Others swear at them. Some people wear the same socks for 3 days straight. You wear whatever isn't frozen solid and doesn't make your mother throw a spoon at you. Let's not forget undergarments. Or actually, let's, because most people didn't have them. Loincloths, maybe. Occasionally hose that tie up at the waist, which means using the toilet is an act of architecture and endurance. There's also a thing called a braise. Baggy linen drawers tied with a drawstring. They're good for airflow, not so good for warmth. And women? They get the joy of managing multiple skirts, sometimes damp, often heavy, and occasionally frozen to the hem from walking through snowdrifts. Fun fringe fact. In some medieval communities, people believed that layering too many clothes could trap evil spirits between them. So if you were wearing 3 tunics and a surcoat, you might be warm, but you were also inviting demonic squatters. That's the kind of logic that comes from spending too many months in the dark. Scholars love to debate how much people really suffered from the cold based on clothing finds in bogs and burial sites. Some argue that wool used cleverly did a better job than modern folks give it credit for. Others say people just built up a tolerance and accepted the cold as part of life. You lean toward the second group. After all, when it's your 6th winter in these boots, and your 3rd time patching the same hole in your tunic, you stop caring how efficient it is. You care whether it gets you through the night. And then there's fashion. Yes, fashion existed, even in winter, even when your fingers were threatening to fall off. Nobles wore brightly dyed fabrics, layered in flashy combinations, with sleeves so long they'd sweep the floor if the snow didn't freeze them first. Women's hoods had liripipes, long tails that flapped in the wind like ridiculous scarves. Someone once told you that wearing blue was a sign of wealth, because blue dye was expensive. You looked at your own soot-coloured tunic and muttered, "We must be priceless then." You've got exactly one item you consider fancy, a wool scarf your grandmother knit before she passed. It's too long, smells faintly of mint, and has holes in both ends, but you wrap it around your neck every day. Not for warmth, though it helps, for memory, because every layer tells a story. This cloak? Stitched by your mother. These mittens? Stolen from your brother, that hole in your boot, courtesy of a frozen nail you stepped on last winter. Congratulations, you're wearing your biography. By midday the sun hangs low, and the snow starts to melt into grimy puddles that soak the hems of your tunic and cloak. Everything you wear grows heavier by the hour, like the cold is trying to pull you into the earth. You don't let it. You walk, you work, you sweat and shiver, and shake out your cloak for the 100th time. It doesn't matter how ugly or itchy or smelly your clothes are. They're what keep you alive. And that's the rule. You wear everything you've got and then you keep moving. Because the second you stop, the cold starts to win, and you're not planning to let it. Not today. It's easy to lose track of days in winter. The sun rises reluctantly and sets before anyone's really gotten started. Light becomes a rumour, a soft smear on the edge of the horizon that barely touches the ground. You're never sure whether it's Tuesday or Thursday, and frankly, it doesn't matter. But there is one stretch of days you always recognise, when the bells ring more often, when the food somehow gets a little better, and when, even in the dead of the coldest season, people try to remember what joy feels like. It's Christmas, or Yuletide, or midwinter. Or, if you're from one of the older families, that time when the forest spirits wake up and demand cakes. Winter festivals are strange things. In a world where most celebrations are dictated by the church, the line between sacred and survival gets blurry. One moment you're singing hymns in a chapel so cold your breath fogs the altar. The next, you're dancing barefoot on the packed dirt floor of your home while someone plays a cracked lute and your uncle tries not to fall into the fire. It's all part of the season. The build-up begins with Advent. Not that you count down the days with chocolate like people in warmer, cushier centuries do. Your countdown is more like only 12 more root vegetable meals until the feast, or 11 more nights until I'm allowed to sleep in an extra hour. The church bells ring more often during Advent, calling people to mass, penance and fasting, which feels a bit redundant since you've been unintentionally fasting for weeks anyway. But the promise is there. Endure the cold and the hunger a little longer, and eventually there will be food, music and warmth, briefly. Christmas Day is the big one. The whole village buzzes with strange energy. You wake up earlier than usual, which seems unfair. But today there's something different in the air. Your mother's already tending the fire and the pot over it smells like actual meat. Not old dried smoked bits, real meat. There's excitement in your chest and maybe a little drool on your chin. The last time you saw your parents this animated, someone had gotten married or died. Both involved bread. Your father, usually a walking scowl this time of year, hums under his breath while chopping a few extra logs. He even pats you on the head. It's weird. You try not to make eye contact. Your siblings are squabbling over whose turn it is to wear the single remaining festive scarf, which has been passed around like a sacred relic every winter since it first appeared. It's red, slightly moth-eaten, and smelled like smoked cabbage. It's perfect. By midday, the feast begins. It's not extravagant, but compared to your regular meals, it's a miracle. Roasted goose, or maybe a rabbit if goose was too expensive. Root vegetables glazed with honey. Spiced ale, mostly warm, mostly alcoholic. Bread made that very morning, still soft in the centre. You get seconds, maybe even thirds. You're not sure if it's the food or the warmth or the feeling of not having to ration every bite, but something inside you loosens. For a moment you're not surviving. You're celebrating. They're singing. It's off-key, loud and fueled by drink. People you haven't spoken to in weeks suddenly remember how to laugh. There's always one uncle who brings out a drum and plays the same rhythm for hours while someone else, someone braver, starts dancing. And the dancing, God's help us, is truly something. Heavy boots thudding on the frozen dirt, skirts twirling wide enough to knock over small children, whooping that echoes out into the night air like the forests being exorcised. The church, meanwhile, does its best to keep things holy. Midnight mass is held, even if half the attendees are drunk and trying not to fall asleep. The priest delivers a sermon that half the village listens to and the other half pretends to hear, while planning how to sneak the last bit of pie. The candles flicker in the nave, lighting faces that haven't smiled in weeks. It's beautiful in a smoky, chaotic kind of way. What's strange is how old it all feels. Sure, the priest talks about Christ, Mary, angels in the sky, but in your bones you feel something older. The Yule log burning in the hearth has roots in traditions older than the saints. The fir branches over the door are not just decoration, they're meant to keep something out. You remember your grandmother whispering stories about things that roam on the longest night. Wild hunts, spirits in the trees, animals that speak when the sun is at its weakest. You look sideways at your goat. It stares back, unimpressed. Fringe fact, in some villages, people used to burn effigies during the winter solstice, a stand-in for the old year, or the old gods, depending on who you ask. Some say they buried those figures under their hearths, or tossed them into rivers, or danced around them until they caught fire. No one agrees exactly what the ritual meant, but everyone agrees it felt important. These days you just throw a particularly ugly log in the fire and call it tradition. The scholars argue about whether Christmas was really joyful for common folk or if it was just a break from starvation and drudgery. One camp believes it was deeply spiritual, full of awe and reverence. Another thinks it was a well-earned excuse to get smashed and forget how miserable winter actually is. You're inclined to think both were true. People need warmth, but they also need wonder. Even if that wonder comes in the form of a badly stuffed goose and your aunt telling the same story about the time she kissed a bishop under the mistletoe. The celebration lasts 12 days if you're lucky and your pantry can spare it. By the time Epiphany rolls around, the food's gone back to thin gruel and the firewood pile looks like a sad memory. But for those days in between, you had joy. You had music and meat and maybe even hope. As night settles after the final feast, you wrap yourself in the patchy scarf, the one that smells like smoke and honey and too many winters. The embers glow bright in the hearth. Someone hums a carol that turns into a lullaby. You sit back, full for once, warm for now, and almost, not quite, but almost forget the cold pressing against the shutters. By early January, the cheer of Christmas fades like smoke from the last burned-out log, and reality returns with a vengeance. Your belly, briefly full, begins its usual complaining. The bread goes hard again. The dried beans lose their charm. The frost on the windows no longer glitters, it just stares back, colder than ever. and looming behind all of it is the unspoken question, how much firewood is left? You step outside to check the pile. It's smaller, considerably smaller. You count the logs one by one, your breath fogging over them, as if that'll help them multiply. You've got maybe enough to make it through 3 more weeks. 4 if you ration, 5 if you start burning the branches you swore you'd save for fence repair. You pretend you don't notice the ones that have mysteriously vanished from the bottom of the stack, because you know your neighbour's pile disappeared 2 weeks ago, and suddenly his chimney's puffing again. You consider saying something. Then again, you also remember the way his daughter's lips turned blue last week. How she wouldn't stop coughing even after they wrapped her in every blanket they had. You sigh, pick up a log and head inside. Survival doesn't leave much room for blame. Firewood isn't just fuel, it's currency. In winter, it's more valuable than gold. Gold won't cook your porridge or keep your baby from freezing in the cradle. A dry bundle of kindling, though, that's a miracle. That's warmth, that's life. Which is why every stick, twig and splinter in your possession is counted, watched, and sometimes even fought over. You remember the collection days, late autumn, long before the snows fell. The entire village marched into the woods with axes and carts and empty baskets. The young chopped, the old gathered, children carried bundles back on their set of backs, smaller than the tools but twice as stubborn. It wasn't festive, it was business. Every branch had a future, every log was an insurance policy against the bitter nights ahead. And now, that effort sits in a shrinking pile outside your door, vanishing one burn at a time. You ration. Not just food, not just clothes, but flame. You light 1 fire a day, maybe 2 if it's truly unbearable. You stack the logs in specific orders, mixing softwood with hardwood, trying to stretch the burn. You sweep the hearth to collect leftover ash, which you'll use to make lye later for soap, assuming you still have fat to mix it with, which, at this point, is a laughable assumption. Some folks start burning alternatives. Old furniture, broken fence posts, even the legs off stools if the choice is between sitting down or freezing solid. You once heard of a man who burned the rafters from his own barn one by one until the entire thing collapsed. He didn't survive the winter, but hey, the fire lasted a few extra nights. You start bartering. A hen for a wagon load of kindling, a spare pair of mittens for a few thick logs. You begin to eye trees differently. That one near the creek could be dry by next winter. That pile of brush by the chapel looks a little too flammable to be ignored. You don't say it out loud, but everyone knows it. The firewood economy has kicked in and it's brutal. Here's a weird fact that makes you feel slightly better about your struggles. Some medieval towns had laws about firewood theft so harsh they make your neighbour's sticky fingers seem noble by comparison. In certain places, stealing wood could get you fined, whipped, or even thrown out of the village. Not because of the value of the tree, but because of what that tree meant in February. Warmth. And warmth was everything. The rich, of course, had people for this. Woodcutters, servants, stewards who managed the estate forests and ensured the Lord's hearth never went cold. Their fires roared in multiple rooms, sometimes even in private bedchambers. They had wood to spare. You try not to think about it too much. Envy doesn't stoke your fire. There's a scholar's debate over how sustainable medieval forestry really was. Some say they managed the woods carefully, rotating cuts, planting as they went. Others argue they chopped down anything that stood and worried about the consequences later. You know from experience that the forest doesn't care about theories. It gives what it gives, and if you take too much, it won't be there next year. You've seen clearings that have never recovered. You've also seen people freeze in homes surrounded by empty stumps. The cold gets into your bones now, faster than it used to. You think maybe you're coming down with something. Maybe it's just the fire getting smaller. Hard to tell. You keep your hands near the flames as much as possible. You dry your socks every night. You sleep closer to the hearth, toes nearly in the ashes. Your back is sore from the hard floor, but it beats frostbite. And yet, there's beauty in them. A kind of hypnotic wonder that cuts through the bleakness. The way flames twist and dance, the warm glow against the faces of your family, the sound of wood popping like far-off thunder. You start to recognise different types of fire. Crackling pine, hissing damp logs, the low, even burn of perfectly dried oak. It becomes a language you speak fluently. You know when a fire is healthy. You know when it's dying. There's also silence. Long hours of it, broken only by the hiss of steam from the pot or the occasional groan of shifting timbers. You think more in winter. You watch. You wait. And when you dream, it's of warm places, green hills and sunlit paths, Rooms where fire isn't a desperate necessity but a pleasant detail. But morning always comes, and with it, the ritual begins again. You bank the coals, whisper a prayer, not to any particular god, just to whatever listens, and throw on the first stick. It catches. The flame spreads. The room warms by a degree or two, enough to breathe without flinching. That's victory. That's hope. One log at a time. You've got a cough. Nothing dramatic yet. Just a rough little scrape at the back of your throat that's been hanging around for a few days, too stubborn to leave, but not loud enough to worry anyone else. You haven't told your mother. No point. She'd just look at you with that worried glance that's halfway between fear and resignation. And then she'd make you drink something that smells like old feet and burns like witch fire going down. So instead, you clear your throat, spit into the ashes, and pretend it's nothing. But in winter, everything becomes something. A sniffle becomes a fever. A cough becomes a rattle. A small chill turns into a shiver you can't shake. And once that sets in, once your body starts losing the fight against the cold, people look at you differently. They get quieter around you. They stand a little farther away, because they've seen it before. People don't just die in battles and childbirth. They die coughing into their blankets, trying to stay warm beside a fire that can't seem to touch them anymore. When medicine is brought up, it's usually in the form of herbal concoctions, half-remembered traditions, and whatever the village-wise woman hasn't run out of. There are no pharmacies, no nice little vials with printed labels. Instead, there's a shelf with dried herbs, some of which look suspiciously like weeds, and a few jars of unidentifiable goop that promise everything from brisk breathing to cleansing the black bile. You're not entirely sure what black bile is, but you're confident you have too much of it. Your neighbour, old Marta, is the go-to healer in your part of the village. She smells like sour milk and mint, and her hut always has smoke leaking from the cracks in strange colours. People visit her in secret when the priest isn't looking. Not because she's dangerous, but because the line between healer and heretic is paper thin, especially in winter when fear hangs heavier than snow. She catches you hacking into your sleeve one morning and corners you behind the well. Doesn't ask, just hands you a pouch filled with something that crunches and clinks and smells like a garden that's been left alone too long. Boil it in water, not too hot, let it steep, then drink. You nod like you'll follow the instructions exactly. You won't, but you'll try. You're too tired not to. Later you find a kettle, pour in water, and toss in a pinch of the mystery mix. The scent fills the room, bitter, grassy, with a sharp kick of something that makes your eyes water. You sip it slowly, trying not to gag. Everyone in your family watches you with exaggerated sympathy, clearly relieved it's not their turn yet. Your sister fakes a cough and gets a glare from your mother. Winter is not the time for jokes. Here's a quirky little truth. Medieval people really believed in the balance of humours. Not humour like laughter, though heaven knows you could use more of that. No, these were bodily fluids. Blood, phlegm, black bile and yellow bile. And the goal was to keep them in harmony. Too much phlegm, that's a cold, probably melancholy. Too much bile, fever, the treatment. Drain some blood, obviously. Or maybe eat boiled leeks and say a prayer to St. Sebastian. Or rub goose fat on your chest while chanting backwards. There's not an exact science. You've seen it done. Leeches, bloodletting, the whole mess. The local priest likes to talk about divine punishment for sin and how sickness is a test. You're not sure. You're pretty sure if it's a test, the questions are written in Latin, and no one gave you a quill. You think back to when your cousin got the flux last year and couldn't stop sweating. They burned rosemary, garlic, even shoe leather in the hearth, trying to chase the illness out of the room. In the end, he survived, but he hasn't been quite right since. Talks to geese now. Stares off when the snow falls too hard. There's always a debate between church cures and village cures. The priest says prayer and penance, Marta says honey and elderflower. Your mother says hot broth and staying quiet. You try all three, you kneel at mass, cough politely into your sleeve, drink the tea, eat the broth and keep your mouth shut. Whether it's superstition or science, you'll take any solution that doesn't involve bleeding you with a knife that hasn't been cleaned since last harvest. The problem is that medicine doesn't work the way you want it to. You can do everything right and still get worse, or ignore it all and wake up fine. There's no pattern, no fairness. You once heard of a man who ate nothing but garlic and onions all winter, and claimed it kept him healthy. He also got struck by lightning the following spring, so take that as you will. Scholars like to argue about the effectiveness of medieval remedies. Some claim they were surprisingly clever, using willow bark for pain or mint for digestion. Others say it was mostly ritual and blind hope. But none of them had to drink boiled dandelion and bathe in cold ash while their mother whispered a prayer over their forehead. None of them had to decide between drinking another cup of herb sludge or saving the last of it for someone sicker. You lie near the fire that night, wrapped tight, coughing just enough to be annoying. Your skin feels hot in places, cold in others. Your lips are cracked. Your throat's raw. You pull your cloak tighter, roll toward the hearth, and try to imagine spring. Not because you think it'll come soon, but because you need to believe in something that isn't more snow and more shivering. You think about Marta's hands, wrinkled and stained, pressing a bundle of herbs into yours without a word. You think about your cousin and his goose conversations. You think about the priest's sermons, the prayers, the sweat of fever, the burn of ginger on your tongue. Eventually your cough eases. Maybe it's the tea, maybe it's the fire, maybe it's nothing. You breathe slowly, shallowly, as if each inhale might wake the sickness again. You fall asleep hoping the tea was strong enough, hoping the fever stays mild, hoping your family doesn't hear you wheezing. And in the silence of the room, only the fire breathes with you. It starts with a sharp, stinging pain in your toes when you wake up. Not the usual numbness that fades after you stretch your legs by the fire, but something different, deeper, angrier. You sit up, peel off your stiff socks, and stare down at your feet. The skin on your smallest toes has turned an angry purple, and one of them, you're not even sure which, has a patch of black. You touch it with a hesitant finger. It's like pressing on cold stone. No feeling, no pain even. And somehow that's worse. You don't panic. Not right away. You just slide your sock back on and pull your cloak tighter. You've seen this before. Last winter, the boy from 2 doors down lost half his foot to the coal. They wrapped it in cloth soaked with goose fat and kept him by the fire for weeks, but by the end he walked with a limp and a blank stare. Everyone said he was lucky. He didn't seem lucky. You shuffle into the common room where the fire's still smouldering from last night. The room is quiet. Too quiet. Someone else must have noticed the change in you, because your mother eyes your feet with that same tired dread she reserves for every threat winter throws at her children. "Let me see," she says. You do, because you don't really have a choice. She doesn't gasp or cry, just sighs. Deep, heavy, like something inside her has cracked. "Frostbite," she mutters. "The skin's dead. You didn't tell me sooner." You mumble something about how it didn't hurt. She waves you off. She's not angry, she's just calculating. How much wood to burn keeping you warm. How many days of soup you'll need if you can't walk. What to do if the rot spreads. There's no doctor in the village. There's Marta again, and her endless pouch of crushed herbs and bitter paste. She gets summoned, shows up with her hair in tangles and her breath steaming like a cauldron. She squints at your feet, frowns, and digs into her sack. Out comes a tin of something thick and yellowish. It smells like garlic, tallow, and regret. "Rub this on twice a day," she says. "Don't let the toes get cold. Wrap them tight, not too tight. And don't move more than you need to." Your mother thanks her. You don't speak. You're staring at your toes, wondering if they're still yours. The paste goes on warm and starts to burn. Not in a painful way, but like your foot's remembering how to feel, and it's not thrilled about the return. Marta says that's good. Pain means something's still alive in there. You pretend to believe her. You want to. She also gives your mother a small bottle of spirits, not for drinking. If the black spreads, you'll need this. Your mother nods. You try not to think about what that means. That night your foot is wrapped in cloth so thick you feel like it's been replaced by a small pillow. You can't move much. You lie near the fire, unmoving, watching the others bustle around. Chores don't stop just because your toes are staging a rebellion. Wood still has to be split, water hauled, chickens fed. You feel useless, and that stings more than the garlic paste. A few nights later, the pain returns in force. Your foot pulses, beats in time with your heart, sends little shocks up your calf every time someone walks too close. It's awful, but it's also the best thing you've felt in days. Marta was right. Pain is a gift, however twisted. Still, the days pass slowly. You stop helping with chores. You barely move. Your body aches from lying still, but you're too afraid to test the foot. Every evening your mother unwraps it and checks the skin like it's a map she's reading for signs of disaster. The black patch hasn't grown. That's something. The purple is fading to an ugly, mottled grey. You're not celebrating yet. One evening, your little sister makes a joke about how you'll be Forto instead of your name, and your father laughs. Not cruelly, just the way people laugh when they're too tired to be afraid anymore. It's not a great joke, but it breaks the tension, and for a moment, the firelight catches everyone's faces in a way that feels normal. Here's a strange fringe detail you once heard from an old man with 2 fingers missing. People used to believe frostbite wasn't from the cold at all, but from angry spirits biting you while you slept. Some even left food out at night, not for the saints or the poor, but for the winter demons, hoping they'd pass by their beds without nibbling on their toes. You laugh at that now, but not too hard, because when your foot starts to throb again, you'd swear something unseen is chewing on it. The scholars argue about frostbite in medieval times, how common it was, how it was treated, whether anyone understood what was really happening beneath the skin. Some say people just toughed it out. Others think old remedies actually worked better than we give them credit for. You don't know what's true. You just know that you're still here, still wrapped in scratchy wool, still breathing beside the fire. Eventually you're allowed to hobble around. Your mother wraps your foot so tightly it looks like a bundled roast, and you use a stick to lean on. It hurts. Everything hurts. But you're moving again. That's a gift. You limp out to check the snow, to feel air on your face. You last 3 minutes before your foot starts screaming at you. But still, you made it outside. Progress. You take more care now. No bare feet, no shortcuts through the snowdrifts. Every step is cautious, deliberate. And when you lie down at night, you wrap your foot yourself. Not because you have to, because it's yours again. The scar never goes away. The toe turns a little weird, a little stiff, but it stays. That's enough. And you survive. Not because of science or miracles, but because of garlic paste, family vigilance, and whatever stubborn little fire still burns inside your half-dead limbs. Winter has a special way of turning your home into a prison, and not even a dramatic one. There are no clanging gates or guards with pikes, just long grey days stacked one after another like mouldy loaves of bread, each one colder and quieter than the last. Cabin fever? You've heard the term whispered, like it's a condition only weak people civvies suffer. But you know better. After weeks of being trapped in the same small room with the same tired faces, the only thing weaker than your sanity is the front door latch, which you keep fantasizing about kicking open and sprinting through, barefoot straight into the snow just to feel something. The house smells like people, not in a sweet nostalgic way, more like damp wool, burnt onions, stale breath, and goats, because yes, sometimes the goats come inside. You've given up fighting it. The goats are family now. You give one of them your seat near the fire. It headbutts you anyway. Your siblings are everywhere, always, breathing loudly, picking their teeth with sticks, arguing over who gets the next crust of bread. You can hear your older brother's jaw clicking when he chews, and you've begun to plot his quiet disappearance. Your younger sister has started singing nonsense songs just to fill the silence, and your father glares at her like he's trying to remember whether silence was ever a real thing, or just something people invented for books. There are no books, by the way, not here. Not unless you count the family prayer board with chipped paint and that one page from a hymn that your mother keeps in a wooden box under the bed. You've read it so many times, you've started improvising your own verses just for the sake of variety. Rejoice, all ye cold and miserable, for thou shalt one day bathe again, is your personal favourite. Boredom in winter isn't just a side effect, it's a disease. It eats at you, makes your thoughts louder, gives you the kind of restlessness that turns into twitchy feet and squabbles over nothing. One morning you nearly come to blows with your brother over who gets to feed the fire. Not even who chops the wood, just who gets to touch the fire poker. He wins, mostly because you're still limping. Time becomes a fog. You wake up, eat, sit by the fire, stare at the wall, maybe nap, eat again, go to sleep. Sometimes you swap the order. Sometimes you swear the same hour is repeating itself. The sun barely appears, and when it does, it's just a pale, greasy smear behind the clouds, like it's too embarrassed to shine properly. Games help. A little. You carve dice from bone, play endless rounds of something you call keep or curse, which is basically betting which food will go mouldy next. You draw pictures in the ash on the hearthstone until your father tells you to stop summoning demons. You play who can stay quiet the longest, which lasts about 17 seconds. Your mother starts assigning chores just to keep people from clawing at each other. Dust this, sort that, untangle the cords, scrub the table even though it's already clean. Your older sister spends an entire afternoon weaving bits of straw into a makeshift broom. She calls it her masterpiece. You all cheer like she's invented the spinning wheel. This is where you are now. Brooms are thrilling. At night, things get weird. Not ghost story weird, just mind weird. You lie awake listening to the fire crackle, and you start imagining it talking to you, whispering stories. Or maybe it's just your brother's snores echoing through the room like a bear with a head cold. Either way, you start to see shapes in the shadows, creatures, faces, forests. Not scary, not quite, just unfamiliar. You stare too long, and your brain starts writing its own plays. Some folks talk about the winter thoughts, the things you think when the dark stretches too long. Old regrets, strange dreams, fantasies about packing up and walking to the sea. Even if you don't know what the sea is, you've had them too. One morning you catch yourself imagining what it would feel like to sleep in snow on purpose. Not to die, just to get away from the noise. That's when you know you need air. You wrap yourself in every layer you can find and step outside. The cold slaps you across the face like an insult. You keep going anyway, across the yard, through the snowdrifts, past the silent goat who now sleeps with your family and judges your every move. You walk until your toes ache and your breath burns your throat. You stare at the trees, the sky, the white, and you breathe, just for a minute, just to remember the world is bigger than your house, than the stew, than your brother's chewing. The snow creaks beneath your boots. A raven flaps overhead, cawing once sharply like it's laughing at you. You flip it off, you feel better. Weird fact of the night. In some medieval households there were designated winter stories, told only during the cold months. Folk tales reserved for when spirits were thought to be closer, when the walls felt thinner and the nights felt longer. They were stories of wolves who walked like men, forests that whispered your name, children who wandered out into snowstorms and returned with eyes the colour of ash. You've heard a few. You've told some yourself. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it keeps people awake. Scholars argue whether cabin fever was truly a known phenomenon in the Middle Ages. Some say yes, accounts of strange winter behaviours, arguments, even mild madness appear in village records and monastic logs. Others say it's a modern invention. You say, let them argue. You've seen a grown man chase his own boot across the room out of sheer boredom. Something's definitely happening. Eventually spring will come. That's what they tell you. Green will return, life will resume, and your family will go back to working in the fields and arguing about chickens instead of who sat on the last dry blanket. But until then, you'll survive the madness together. The noise, the silence, the fire, the ghosts in the shadows that look suspiciously like your little sister hiding so she doesn't have to scrub the pot again. You fall asleep that night, dreaming of open fields and fresh air, and when you wake up it's still snowing. It starts with a cluck, a slow, low, deeply offended cluck that comes from somewhere behind the firewood pile. Then a snort, a shuffle. Something flops over in the corner with the weight and grace of a half-drunk uncle falling off a stool. You don't bother reacting anymore. You already know what it is. Welcome to another proud day in your medieval life where the line between household pet and livestock currently squatting in your kitchen is paper-thin and vanishing fast. You glance across the room, the goat's in again. Not curled neatly in a corner, mind you, but stretched out like it owns the place. Hooves near the hearth, chewing something that looks suspiciously like one of your mittens. Your mother waves it off without looking. She gave up the fight 2 weeks ago. At this point, animals indoors aren't a crisis. They're a design choice. This is the reality of winter in the Middle Ages. Humans and animals jammed into the same smoky, drafty space, all pretending this arrangement is reasonable. You didn't invite them in out of love or some pre-modern obsession with rustic charm. You brought them inside because it's either that or find them frozen stiff in the morning, glassy-eyed and worth exactly 0 milk. So now you share the room with 2 chickens, 1 goat, a piglet that refuses to stop squealing after sundown, and, briefly, a duck that somehow got in and still hasn't been caught. You suspect it's nesting behind the basket of kindling and watching everything you do with quiet disdain. If you die in your sleep, the duck will probably inherit your place. The house smells, of course, not dramatically, not in a way that knocks you backward. No, it's worse than that. It's a background stench. A stew of sweat, wet wool, ash, smoke, manure, hay, old cabbage, and livestock musk that settles into your clothes, your blankets, your skin. You've stopped noticing it most days, but every once in a while the wind shifts just right, and you remember how fresh air used to feel. You have to share everything, the fire, the floor, the food scraps. At least once a day the pig makes a break for the pot. It hasn't succeeded yet, but it's come dangerously close to nosing its way into the soup. You're starting to wonder if it understands the concept of revenge. People imagine medieval winters as quiet affairs. Stillness, flickering candlelight, peaceful prayers. They don't factor in the constant background soundtrack of clucking, snorting, squealing and chewing. Your goat snores loudly. Your chickens flap their wings in their sleep. The pig grunts in response to dreams it refuses to explain. You haven't had silence in weeks, and it's not just the noise, it's the chaos. You step in droppings on your way to the chamber pot. You trip over straw that's supposed to be bedding, but has become a makeshift carpet that moves underfoot. You try to tie your cloak and find feathers stuck in the lining. The house has become a barn and the barn has moved in with you. The boundaries have blurred entirely. And yet, you live like this because it works, sort of. Chickens, even half frozen and sleep deprived, won't lay eggs in winter if they're warm. Goats kept near the hearth stay alive, which means milk for the baby, and maybe enough to make a lump of sour cheese if your mother feels ambitious. Your piglet won't make it to spring if it spends another night outside, so you tolerate it. You adapt. You pull your blanket tighter, shift when the goat nudges your back in its sleep, and ignore the feather that's tickling your ear. Quirky fact? In some parts of medieval Europe, animals brought indoors during winter were believed to offer protection, not just warmth, but actual spiritual safety. A cow in the house meant luck. A dog near the fire meant no evil spirits would dare enter. And chickens, apparently their clucking kept away goblins. You're not sure if any of that's true, but it does give you something to mutter to yourself when you wake up face first in a pile of straw next to a softly snoring pig. Scholars like to paint a quaint picture of wintertime peasant life. Cows peacefully chewing cud near the hearth, children sleeping with lambs like wool-clad cherubs. They don't often mention the part where the cow lets loose right there in the middle of the floor, and everyone scrambles to clean it up before the baby crawls through it. Or the part where the pig gets territorial and bites your toe, or where the goat eats the corner of the prayer sheet and now you're technically blaspheming every time you try to recite it. The village priest isn't a fan of animals indoors. He gives stern sermons about the order of God's creation and how humans are meant to rule over beasts, not nap beside them. Everyone nods along politely while a hen peeks out from beneath someone's cloak and lays an egg right there on the pew. One afternoon the duck finally reappears in full view, strutting across the room like it's inspecting the property. It quacks once, poops dramatically beside the hearth, and disappears again behind the firewood. You don't even react. You're not sure you have the emotional energy anymore. There are upsides though. The body heat matters. Even a single goat gives off warmth, and when it's huddled near the hearth you can feel the difference. At night you tuck your feet against the pig's side, assuming it hasn't stolen your blanket, and it's warmer than any pair of socks you've ever owned. The chickens provide entertainment, clucking nervously whenever someone sneezes or shifts too loudly. And there's something undeniably cosy about the way everyone, human and animal, gathers together near the fire, snoring in some chaotic symphony of survival. Eventually spring will come and the animals will be evicted. They'll go back to the yard, the barn, the fields. You'll have the floor back, the blankets, the fire, the sweet silence of nothing squawking into your ear at 3 a.m. But for now, you pull the blanket over your head to block out the chicken currently trying to roost on your shoulder, and you let out a sigh that smells vaguely of goat. This is winter. Not glorious, not clean, but somehow functional. There's something strange that happens deep in winter, when the days have shriveled to their shortest and the darkness feels older than the house you sleep in. The village gets quiet in a different way, not from lack of activity, but because something else takes over. A shift in the air, in the way people move, speak, and even glance out their windows. You don't quite have the words for it, but your bones recognise it. Something ancient, something older than Christmas, older than Christ. It's solstice time, and though you now call it Midwinter Mass or the Feast of St. Thomas or something equally church-approved, underneath all that holiness still crawls the memory of something pagan. The signs are subtle, but they're there. Your mother hangs greenery above the door, not just to be festive, but because it's tradition. Holly, ivy, maybe even mistletoe. If someone's daring enough to scale the trees near the marsh, you ask her why. She says it keeps the house from souring. That's not a metaphor. She means it literally. When the nights are longest, things slip in through the cracks, she whispers, as if even explaining it out loud might invite something to come sniffing around the hearth. There are fires, of course, bigger than usual. You don't just tend the hearth, you build a bonfire out behind the woodshed with your father, stacking logs like it's a funeral pyre. It feels excessive, especially when firewood is precious, but no one questions it. It has to burn all night, your father says, setting the kindling like he's done this 1,000 times before, from dusk to dawn, or the sun forgets how to rise. He doesn't smile when he says it. That night the whole village gathers around the flames. No sermons, no Latin prayers, just people standing in the cold watching fire gnaw through wood while the snow falls in slow, lazy spirals. Someone tells stories, not church tales, older ones. A woman in the dark woods who guides lost souls back home, a horned man with fur for skin who appears to those who lie, a procession of glowing animals that walk the skies to mark the new year. You listen wide-eyed, and for the first time in weeks, your toes don't feel cold. You feel it in your chest too, that hum, like the earth is holding its breath, like something is passing by just out of sight. The others feel it too. They drink warmed ale, eat flatbread sprinkled with salt, and whisper wishes into the smoke as if the flames can carry them somewhere. You whisper yours into your sleeve. You're not telling anyone what it is. That's between you and the dark. This time of year has always been loaded. Long before churches and hymns and holy water, people mark the turning of the sun like it was a deity on a tight schedule. The shortest day of the year, winter solstice, wasn't just a celestial fact. It was a spiritual checkpoint. If you made it this far, you had a shot at spring, but only if you played your part, lit the fires, told the stories, offered food to the cold, not to eat, but to placate. Bread left at the edge of the forest, a cup of beer left on the doorstep. You do these things without fully understanding them, because not doing them feels dangerous. Quirky fact, in some parts of medieval Europe, especially the tucked-away, hard-to-reach places, people still held solstice feasts that included dancing in animal masks, lighting wheels on fire to roll down hills, and keeping silence during certain hours of the night, when the old ones were said to pass by. And while the church tried its best to smother these customs under layers of saints and sacraments, they never quite disappeared. You see it in the eyes of the elders when they say grace, how they pause just long enough between lines for something unspoken to slip in. The priest doesn't attend the bonfire. He stays in his stone chapel, probably muttering psalms to the ceiling beams. He's preached before about heathen nonsense, and he's especially scathing about those who leave bread for beasts that don't exist. But you've seen him glance sideways at the woods when the solstice draws near. His prayers get longer. He sleeps with a candle burning. No one mentions it. At home, after the fire's died and the embers crackle like bones in the ash, your family huddles inside. Your mother takes a dried orange peel and tosses it into the hearth. Your father drops in a twist of dried herb, rosemary, maybe. Your little sister hums a wordless tune you've never heard before. It's not a song you know, and it doesn't sound like any hymn. She says it came in a dream. No one scolds her. The solstice brings dreams too. Vivid, strange, and often unpleasant. People wake up sweating or crying, or both. You dream of walking through the woods barefoot, trailing fire from your fingers, chased by shadows that speak your name in voices you don't recognise. When you wake, your blanket's slipped halfway off and your foot is nearly touching the dying coals. You pull it back quickly, heart racing. There's a sense in the village that the days just before and just after the solstice are thin, that the wall between this world and whatever lies behind the trees or below the soil is delicate, like ice on a puddle. People speak more quietly. Doors are double bolted. Fires are never allowed to go out, even if it means burning the last scrap of firewood you own. No one wants to test what waits in the cold. The scholars debate whether these pagan remnants are superstition or cultural memory, whether people believed in spirits or simply needed meaning to make the cold more bearable. You think maybe both are true. Maybe fear and hope are old twins born in a cave, passed down from mother to child the way recipes and lullabies are. Eventually the sun starts rising a little earlier each day. Not much. Minutes at most, but it's enough. Enough to say the worst has passed, even if the snow keeps falling. Enough to feel that spring, while still a myth, might one day be real again. The solstice doesn't end the winter. It just gives you permission to believe you'll live through it. So you do. You stoke the fire, you eat the last of the salted bread, you hang the greenery a little longer, and at night you whisper thanks. To saints, to spirits, to the air itself. You don't need to know who's listening. You just need them to hear you. Snow, in theory, is supposed to be beautiful. That's what the poets and song singers claim, at least. The soft hush as it falls, the sparkle of moonlight on icy branches, the childlike wonder of a world turned white and clean. But you know better. Snow is a liar. It pretends to be gentle, but once it settles, it becomes a blunt, frozen weapon. One that medieval villagers like you wield with alarming creativity. Especially the children. Especially your village's children. You learn early not to trust a snowball in the hands of a 6-year-old. It may look innocent, but the inside will be packed with gravel, or frozen solid as a stone. And if your back is turned, that's not an opportunity, it's an invitation. One day you step outside the cottage to check the goats, and wham! A snowball clips the side of your head with the force of divine judgment. You stagger, you curse, you turn around, and there's a pack of grubby-faced kids giggling from behind a half-frozen hedge, already cocking back their arms for round 2. There's no age limit on snow warfare. The older boys build defences, low walls made of packed snow with trenches and lookout posts. The younger ones become erratic berserkers, flinging snow mud sticks and occasionally each other. You've seen one child use a wooden spoon as a catapult. You've seen another produce a slingshot made from bootlaces and a rock the size of your thumb. It's terrifying, it's constant. And it's not always play, because when snow cuts off trade routes and locks people into tight, cold quarters, tensions build. And kids don't need much of a reason to let it all loose. Maybe it starts with a joke about someone's patched trousers. Maybe someone stole a sweet from the Yule pile. Maybe it's just the 6th week of snow and nobody can remember the colour green anymore. Whatever the cause, by midwinter, snow becomes the perfect outlet for every simmering insult and unspoken grudge. There's one street in the village where you know not to walk unless you're on a face full of slush. It's narrow, walled by tall drifts, and patrolled by a rotating gang of children who've turned it into their personal fortress. They charge tolls, usually in bread crusts or riddles, and if you don't pay, you get pelted. Adults get it just as bad. You once saw old Joan the butcher get taken down by a snowball to the face. He emerged furious, red-cheeked, shaking a ham-hock at the sky while the culprits vanished giggling into the woodshed. But snow isn't just for games, it's also a trap. Roads freeze over and become slick as glass. People slip. Wagons overturn, horses refuse to move. You remember one afternoon when the village cooper broke his arm trying to carry a barrel across an icy yard. He slid 15 feet before landing in the pig pen. The pigs were unimpressed. He still walks with a limp. And when the snow doesn't fall evenly, it forms ridges and jagged ice cliffs along the paths. Walking to the well becomes a miniature expedition. You take your stick, test each step. Pray you don't vanish into a snowdrift waist-deep and impossible to climb out of. More than once you've had to drag a sibling free with a rope or a very strong branch. It's exhausting. It's humiliating. It's winter. Here's a fringe fact for you. Some medieval towns held organised snowball fights. Not casual skirmishes, but full-scale choreographed events with teams, referees and rules. They even had crowd spectators. Apparently it was meant to build unity and strength among the youth. You're not sure how much unity gets built when half the village's children end up crying, bruised and missing a boot. But hey, maybe it's character building. Meanwhile the snow keeps falling. You dig it out of the doorway every morning. You shovel a path to the animals. You scrape it off the roof so it doesn't collapse under the weight. And still it returns, blanketing everything in a silence that feels more oppressive than peaceful. It's not just cold, it's heavy. When you walk there, through it, it clings to your boots, your cloak, your eyelashes. You come inside dripping and red-faced, and someone always makes a joke about how you look like a boiled beet. Snow blurs boundaries, the roads vanish, the fences sink. You forget where the fields begin. Your neighbour's house becomes a distant, indistinct lump in the fog. The world shrinks to your doorstep, your hearth, the path you shovel and reshovel every day. Isolation sets in, not just from geography, but from the creeping realisation that everything outside the cottage might as well be another world. And then there's the threat of avalanches. Not here in your flat little village, but in the tales passed around from travellers and distant cousins. Entire houses buried, towns erased. You listen wide-eyed, imagining mountains of snow crashing down like the hand of a very cold, very irritated god. You look at your own roof and wonder if the snow piling up on the thatch is heavier than it looks. The worst is when the snow melts and then refreezes. That's when it becomes sharp, jagged, angry. Ice forms on the edges of roofs like teeth, long, thin icicles that drip all day and harden all night. One of them falls just a few feet away from you one morning, stabbing into the ground like a dagger. You look up. The eaves are lined with spears. You start giving the house a very wide berth. Of course, snow has its moments. Late at night, when the moon is full and everything's still, it glows. You step outside and it's like the world has turned to silver. Every sound is muffled. Every tree wears a cloak of white. You take a breath and it tastes like ice and sky. For a brief moment you forget the bruises, the falls, the snowball ambushes. It's just you and winter and the strange cold beauty of a world that has forgotten how to be loud. You walk a few steps just to hear the crunch beneath your feet, just to feel something different. Then something whizzes past your head and explodes against the fence. Snowball, with a rock in it. The kids are back. You sigh, duck, and head for the door. By midwinter, the snow has been around so long it feels like part of the family. An unwanted, frigid cousin who won't leave and eats all your food without contributing anything but mud on the floor. The novelty wore off weeks ago. Now it's just an obstacle, and everyone's patience is thinning faster than the firewood pile. The village starts to unravel in slow, bitter threads, and beneath the frozen politeness of small-town civility, something sharper begins to stir, snow politics. It starts with a path, a narrow one, just wide enough for two people to pass without colliding. You and your father clear it every other morning, dragging out the bent iron-edged shovel, sweating beneath your wool cloaks while your breath fogs the air. It's hard work. Crusted snow doesn't budge without a fight, and your knuckles go numb gripping the handle. Still you do it, because otherwise you can't get to the well, and the neighbours can't get past your door without trampling the garden fence. But then the Morton family stops clearing their end of the lane. It's subtle at first. They claim their oldest son's come down with something, then their shovel goes missing. After that, they just stop mentioning it altogether. The result is a circular, slick, uneven stretch of frozen sludge that runs right in front of your house, turning every trip to the well into an exercise in risk and balance. Your sister slips and nearly brains herself on a bucket. You say nothing, but because what can you say? It's not exactly criminal neglect, it's just lazy, convenient, selfish. But the whispers start anyway. I saw them using a new shovel 2 days ago. They have been stomping a trail to their chicken coop just fine. They're waiting for us to do it. Your mother mutters something under her breath about good neighbours being buried under better ones. You pretend you didn't hear it. Then it happens again. This time it's the path to the chapel. For years the village shared the duty of keeping the way to the church clear. Rotation by household, casual, unspoken. Until this winter. Someone skips their day, then someone else. Pretty soon it's just the carpenter's son out there with a rusted shovel and a scowl so deep it looks carved in granite. You help him, because you don't want your grandmother slipping and breaking a hip, but you see the look on his face when the shoemaker walks past without so much as lifting a finger. You recognise that look. It's the look of someone filing away a grudge for later use. You think winter's supposed to unite people. That's what the songs say, right? Huddled around the fire, sharing food, telling stories. But in real life, the cold pulls people inward. Makes them small, protective, territorial. Your neighbour starts watching your chimney more closely than necessary. If smoke isn't rising, they ask if your firewood's running low, then immediately mention they just happened to get a fresh load from their cousin 3 villages over. Not that they're offering, just saying. You go to fetch water and notice the tavern girl is filling 2 buckets instead of 1. Nothing suspicious until she accidentally leaves one half full at the well. Later it's gone. Her brother's hearth is smoking again. You do the math. And then there are the borrowed things. A cloak hung too close to the communal fire pit disappears. A pot is loaned out and are mysteriously cracked beyond repair. Someone's axe shows up in a different shed. These are not accidents. These are cold weather crimes, delivered politely and denied completely. No one admits anything and everyone pretends it's all just a misunderstanding. Except it isn't. You can feel the weight of it in every narrowed glance and forced smile. Fringe fact, some villages actually created formal winter rules to manage this kind of tension. Codified, handwritten, bizarre little documents dictating who could take kindling from the commons and how much snow one was required to clear from shared roads. Break the rules, and you could be fined in eggs or forced to muck out the pig pens come spring. Some towns even had a snow warden. That's right, An actual person whose job it was to monitor fairness and prevent snow-related petty vengeance from boiling into actual violence. You wish your village had one. Right now you'd vote for the goat. And it's not just property, it's personalities. People start grating on each other. The baker talks too loud. The blacksmith's wife glares at everyone. Your aunt tells the same story about the winter of 72 every single day, like it's a moral parable. And if she compares this year's frost to the true blizzard one more time, you're going to stuff snow down her boots. Even the animals start reflecting the mood. The chickens peck harder. The goats get more ornery. The dog stops wagging its tail. Your household becomes a pot on a slow boil, and all it takes is one snap, one spilled bucket, one snide comment for it to boil over. That happens on a Thursday. Your brother, tired, sore, and still nursing bruised pride after slipping in the Morton slush, snaps at their youngest boy when he tosses a snowball into your yard. The kid cries. Mrs. Morton storms over. Voices rise. Accusations fly. Words like selfish, lazy, and thieving lot are exchanged. Your mother slams the door in the middle of it. You listen from behind the wall, heart pounding. That night your family eats in silence. For the next week no one speaks to the Mortons. Their smoke rises from their chimney, and your mother watches it with hawk eyes. You catch your brother scattering ash on their snowpath in a casual, definitely not petty way. It's ash they can't use now. A message sent in soot. The worst part. You understand. You don't want to, but you do. It's not just about chores or shovels or pride, it's about pressure. The pressure of months trapped together in tiny homes with no privacy, no rest and no escape. The cold doesn't just freeze your fingers, it freezes your patience. But even so, the storm eventually breaks. One day the Morton boy quietly drops a bundle of firewood near your door and runs off before anyone can yell at him. Your brother grumbles, but you see him pull the bundle inside. Later you find an extra bread crust on your doorstep. Your mother pretends not to notice. The goat eats it before anyone else can. This is the rhythm. Cold divides, then hunger reminds, then some small act of grace pulls you back from the edge. You don't forget, but you forgive. Eventually, mostly, you still shovel the path. By mid-January, darkness becomes the only predictable thing in your life. Not just the kind that huddles in the corners of your home, but the enormous smothering blackness that begins to descend sometime after lunch and doesn't lift until long after the rooster's given up trying to guess when morning starts. It's not dramatic either. No violent sunset or golden glow. The light just slips away, like a guest who's had enough of your company and doesn't even bother to say goodbye. At first, the early dusk is an inconvenience. You misjudge the hour, trip over a goat, maybe forget to check the chicken coop until it's pitch black and you have to guess which lumpy shape is a hen and which is the woodpile. But then it becomes something else, deeper, thicker, the kind of darkness you feel between your ribs. Days don't end, they dissolve, and in their place the long, dragging weight of night settles in, heavy as wet wool. The sun sets before supper. You eat by firelight, faces flickering with orange shadows, everyone a little quieter than usual. The meal might be warm, but there's no joy in it, just chewing. The kind of chewing that sounds loud because no one wants to talk. And then, before anyone's even had a chance to stretch their legs or cough with intent, it's bedtime. Because what else are you going to do? Go for a walk? Read a novel by candlelight you don't have? Have a good think in the outhouse? You try to keep the evenings lively at first. Someone tells a story, someone else sings a tune. You try a riddle, but it turns into an argument about whether goats count as livestock or mischief. That lasts about 2 nights. Then everyone begins to settle into silence, the kind that stretches. Your sister picks at her sleeves. Your brother stares into the fire like it owes him money. Your father carves tiny faces into kindling sticks, each one more miserable looking than the last. You stare at the wall. There's a psychological weight to winter nights in the Middle Ages that no one writes ballads about. Not the clergy, not the scholars, not the wandering poets with their sweet songs of frost and firelight, because they never tell you what it's like to spend 16 hours trapped indoors every single night, with no escape from your thoughts or your family's increasingly audible breathing. The darkness gets inside you, makes you restless, makes you paranoid. You start to wonder if you remembered to close the barn door. Then you wonder if someone else forgot. Then you imagine wolves slipping through that door, silent teeth gleaming in the dark. You imagine them creeping through the house, past the hearth, past the piglet that's finally asleep and standing at your bed watching. You throw another log on the fire and pretend you didn't just scare yourself. Your mother lights a tallow candle and places it in a nook above the hearth. Not because she needs the light, but because she refuses to let the shadows win. Candles are precious, you don't waste them. But on nights like this, when the wind howls down the chimney and the shutters rattle like the sucker they want in, one small flame feels worth the cost. Here's a curious little custom. In some parts of Europe, families would mark the passage of winter nights with a night candle, a slow-burning taper measured by hours. When it reached a certain line, you prayed. Another line, you drank something warm. Another, you went to bed. Time measured not in clocks, but in wax. You wish you had one now. Instead, you guess the hour by how close the fire is to dying. You tell yourself stories in your head to pass the time. Stories about spring, about fields, about bare feet in grass, about the sun rising before your stomach starts growling. You imagine fruit. You imagine waking up and not having to scrape frost off your pillow. You imagine silence, not the oppressive kind that blankets the room right now, but the gentle kind, the one that hums in the trees and whispers through open windows. Sleep becomes your only escape. But even sleep feels different now. It comes in waves, light, shallow dozes, broken by the sounds of wind and snoring and the occasional muttered curse from your father when someone kicks him in the shins. The bed is crowded, everyone curled together in a tangled mass of elbows and knees and shared body heat. You lie between your brother and the wall, trying not to breathe too loudly. Your feet are cold, his are worse. You dream strange things, snow that melts into blood, trees that sing, a fire that speaks your name. You wake up sweating despite the cold. Your sister is already up, staring at the fire like she never slept at all. You ask her if she heard something. She nods, then says, "No, don't," and doesn't explain further. People say the darkness messes with your head. They're not wrong. It plays tricks. You think you see movement in the corner of the room, a flicker of something in the hearth smoke, shadows that don't belong to anyone. You tell yourself it's nothing, but you avoid looking too long. The debates in the village have begun. Are the nights getting shorter yet? Is the sun rising earlier? Is it just your imagination? Some insist it's better. Others swear it's worse. No one agrees. One old woman carries a stick marked with notches for each day. She swears the sun stayed down 2 moments longer yesterday than the day before. People stop listening to her. She talks to chickens, after all. Scholars have puzzled over how medieval people measured time in these dark months. Some used stars when they could see them. Others used bells from the church tower, if the bell ringer was sober and remembered. Mostly people just guessed, and guessed badly. You do your best to hold on to a rhythm. Wake when the fire dies. Eat when your stomach growls. Sleep when the world turns black. But the lines blur. The days blend. You start marking time by how many sticks your father's carved, how many eggs the hens have managed to squeeze out, how many times you've caught the pig chewing on your blanket. And still the night drags on. One evening, just as you're about to doze off, you catch it. A sliver of light. Not candlelight. Not widest at the horizon. Just barely touched with silver. The sun, rising earlier, just a little. But enough to remind you that this endless dark won't last forever. You don't say anything. You just smile into your blanket and let the fire warm your face a little longer. You smell it before you see it. Not something burning, though that wouldn't be unusual, but something different, subtle, wrong, like iron left out in the rain, or the sweet sour rot of meat that's gone too far. You wrinkle your nose and glance at your mother, who's stirring the morning stew with a distracted frown. She doesn't say anything, but you see it in her eyes. She smells it too, and she already knows what it means. Another one's gone. Starts as whispers, low and quick, exchanged over the water buckets and behind half-closed doors. By midday, it's no longer rumour. Old Willem, the cooper, has died. His fire went out 2 nights ago and no one checked in until the smoke stopped rising. By then, it was too late. You can't even mourn him properly. The ground's too frozen to dig a grave. So for now, his body rests in the chapel, wrapped in blankets, his face covered with a cloth. Not out of respect, but to keep the cold from making him unrecognisable. And just like that, winter reminds you that it doesn't need drama to kill. It doesn't arrive with fanfare, it just quietly subtracts people from your world. The mood in the village shifts. There's no screaming, no weeping, just a slow, dull ache behind every word, a cautious glance into every corner. People walk slower, speak softer, hold their cloaks tighter. No one wants to be next. And everyone starts to remember, this isn't just a cold season, it's a dangerous one. Your father says Willem was old, that he had 1 foot in the grave already. Your mother scolds him for saying it out loud. You pretend to agree with hearers, but you understand what he means. The ones who go first are always the weakest, the sick, the frail, the ones who gave too much food to the children and kept too little for themselves, the ones who refused help out of pride, the ones who didn't wake up in time to stoke the fire. You watch the old more carefully now. Your grandmother, her hands shaking when she peels turnips. The priest coughing harder after each sermon. Marta, the healer, muttering to herself as she stirs herbs into boiling water. You wonder who's next. You hate that you wonder that. There's no proper funeral. It's too cold and the path to the cemetery is slick with ice and buried under 3 feet of snow. Instead, the priest gathers a few of the stronger villagers and says a prayer over Willem's body in the chapel. The air is so cold inside that their breath clouds around the candle flames, casting halos in the gloom. You're not invited, but you sneak a peek through the shutters. Willem looks small under the blanket, smaller than he ever did alive. You think about how the death count always rises after the solstice. Like winter needs to remind you that even though the light is returning, the cold isn't done, that just when your hope starts to flicker, it can snuff it out with one frozen breath. There's another death the next week. A baby this time. No one talks about it directly, but you see the mother's red eyes and the little bundle buried hastily beneath the snow near the house. No priest, no prayers, just necessity. The ground's too hard for proper mourning. Then a young man slipped on the ice near the edge of the woods, cracked his head. They found him a day later, frozen solid. The goats wouldn't go near him. You start keeping track in your head. A private list, names, faces, Willem, the baby, the man with the crooked jaw who always sang the same song at midsummer. You count them without meaning to, you start to dream about them. Not in a haunted way, just seeing them, standing outside the house, silent, watching. Fringe fact. Some people believe that if a person died in winter and wasn't buried quickly, their spirit would linger until spring. Not malevolent, just restless. The wind outside could be a wandering soul, the creak of the rafters, a ghost waiting for Thaw. In your village, you don't talk about ghosts, but people start lighting candles by the door after sundown, just in case. Scholars will tell you the death rate always went up in winter. Cold, disease, malnutrition, accidents. It was expected, almost accepted. But living through it is different than studying it. You don't just note the pattern, you feel it, like a tightening, like the walls inching closer each time someone disappears. Your sister stops singing. Your brother stops carving. Even the animals seem quieter, like they know. You cling to your routines. Wake, fire, food, chores, sleep. You check on the chickens 3 times instead of 2. You bring in more wood than you need. You whisper names into the hearth when no one's listening just to keep them alive for one more night. There's a superstition your grandmother shared once, quietly like a secret. Don't speak the names of the dead after sunset, she warned. It draws their attention. You asked her what happened if they heard. She just shook her head. They might not know they're dead. You stop saying Willem's name at night. But life doesn't pause. The chores still need doing, the goats still need feeding, the stew still needs stirring. No one has the luxury of grief here. Not in the way you'd imagine. You don't wear black, hang wreaths, or cry dramatically in public. You keep moving, you breathe, you survive. And yet, in the quiet moments, when the fire's burned low and everyone else is asleep, you feel the weight of absence. An empty spot at the waterline. A voice missing from morning greetings. A familiar silhouette no longer limping past your window. You sit beside the fire, poking at it with a stick, watching the embers shift and fall. Each one sparks up, then dies down, flickers, then disappears. You don't cry, not yet. But you hold the list in your head. You remember, because someone has to. When food grows thin and the path to the next village disappears under snowdrifts tall enough to bury a cart, the hunters step forward. Not with fanfare or grand announcements, but with quiet resolve and thick cloaks, their bows slung over their backs, and a look in their eyes that says they're ready to risk frostbite and worse for something fresher than beans and broth. You've never been hunting in winter, not properly, but today, when your uncle shoulders his quiver and glances toward the forest, he jerks his chin toward you. "Come on," he says. "You're old enough now." You're not sure if that's a compliment or a warning. It's still dark when you head out, the sky the colour of slate and the snow crunching hard beneath your boots. Your uncle doesn't speak much, he never has, but in winter he's practically mute. Every breath is white and sharp, every step is careful. The woods aren't far, but getting there feels like crossing into another world. The village disappears behind you, swallowed by frost and fog, and soon it's just trees, silence, and the occasional sound of something shifting in the branches above. You learn quickly that winter hunting is less about skill and more about suffering. You crouch, you wait, you freeze, your fingers go numb trying to hold the bowstring. Your breath fogs up in front of your face and you try not to exhale too loudly. Every noise could scare something off, a deer, a rabbit, a particularly brave squirrel if you're desperate enough. You're desperate enough. Your uncle kneels beside a patch of snow, inspecting faint tracks. "Hare," he mutters. You see nothing, just a few dents in the snow. He follows them like he's reading a map written in ghost ink. You pretend to understand, you don't. But you step where he steps, quiet as you can, your knees aching from the cold, your shoulders tense. After an hour you spot one, ears twitching, nose sniffing the air. A winter hare white as the snow around it, perfectly still, blending into everything. Your uncle stops. Slowly, silently, he raises his bow. You hold your breath. The arrow flies, the hare bolts missed. Your uncle swears under his breath. "We'll circle back," he says. "Come on." You trudge on. By midday your feet are soaked through. The leather of your boots has stiffened, and the cold has climbed up your legs like ivy. You don't say anything because you're not sure your mouth would work properly. You keep walking, watching, waiting. Eventually you find luck, or rather your uncle does. A small herd of deer bedded down in a hollow shielded by pines. They haven't seen you yet. He makes a gesture, silent but unmistakable. You crouch. He takes position. Another arrow. Another tense breath. This time it hits. The deer lets out a short, sharp sound and stumbles. The rest scatter, vanishing like smoke. You both run forward. The deer's not dead. Not yet. It thrashes, blood steaming in the cold air. Your uncle finishes it with a knife, quick and grim. He presses his hand to the carcass and whispers something. A thank you, maybe. Or a prayer. You don't ask. Then comes the hard part, getting it home. There's no sled, no fancy rigging. Just a rope, some thick branches, and your shoulders. The deer is heavy and the snow fights you every step. Your hands blister from the cold, your knees buckle. Your breath comes in ragged, foggy gasps. You fall once. Your uncle doesn't laugh. He just helps you up and keeps pulling. It takes hours. When you finally stumble back into the village, you're soaked, sore, and so hungry you could gnaw your own fingers. But the deer is real, heavy, and still warm enough to steam in the open air. Your family gathers to meet you. No cheering, no clapping, just relief. Maybe a quiet nod from your mother. Your sister stares wide-eyed at the blood on your sleeve. The deer is skinned, butchered, and processed with ruthless efficiency. The meat is salted, some boiled, the organs chopped and dropped into the pot. Nothing is wasted. Even the bones are split for marrow. The hide will be scraped, dried, maybe turned into mittens or boots if there's enough. You don't realise how hungry you are until the smell of fresh stew hits your nose, and then it's all you can think about. That night, for the first time in what feels like years, you eat something tender. Real meat, not dried, not smoked, not stretched into oblivion with turnips and wild onions. The taste explodes in your mouth, rich, savoury, slightly gamey, and utterly perfect. No one speaks during the meal, not out of reverence, just because everyone's too busy eating. You fall asleep full, that alone feels like a miracle. Here's a strange little medieval belief. It was said that animals hunted in the dead of winter carried the spirits of the cold itself, and that eating their flesh could give you strength, or curse you with endless dreams of ice and wind. Some folks refused to eat winter meat altogether. Others claimed it was the only way to survive. You'll take the dreams. Scholars argue whether winter hunting was common among peasants or mostly a desperate act. Some say it was reserved for the Lord's men, poaching punishable by death or maiming. Others claim that during hard winters, everyone turned a blind eye. You know how it works here. If someone comes back with meat, you don't ask where it came from, you just eat. Your uncle doesn't praise you, he doesn't need to. The next morning he hands you a smaller bow. Next time you shoot, he says. It's not much, but in a season where every breath is a fight and every meal is borrowed time, it feels like being knighted, only colder and heavier, and with significantly more deer blood. The problem with medieval winter, well, one of the problems, is that it doesn't end in a clean, satisfying arc. There's no dramatic thaw, no trumpet blare sunrise, no official scroll declaring that warmth has returned to the land. Instead, it teases you. One day in late February, the air feels different. The sun peeks through the clouds for more than 5 minutes, and for a moment you believe. You step outside without your heaviest cloak, lift your face to the light and think, maybe we've turned the corner. And then it snows. Hard, wet, mean, soul-dampening snow that sticks to your skin and drips down the back of your neck like winter itself is laughing at you. This is the season of false springs, where the world lures you out with hope and then drops a slush bomb on your optimism. Everything starts to melt, and then freezes again. The yard turns into a half-frozen swamp. The paths are coated in a layer of slush over ice, a combination so slippery and unpredictable you walk like a drunk duck just to keep your balance. Your boots are soaked again. There's no point drying them anymore. You just leave them near the fire and accept the steaming, squishy indignity as part of daily life. You start stuffing straw inside for extra insulation, which helps a little, until the straw gets wet too and starts growing things you'd rather not identify. It's not just your boots. The entire house is damp. The walls weep with moisture. The thatch in the roof starts to drip. The straw floor turns into a kind of organic sponge. Everything smells mouldy. Even the goat seems unimpressed. She stands in the corner with her ears drooped, visibly offended that the mud has found its way indoors. Your body reacts in odd ways. You're exhausted all the time, but you can't sleep. Your joints ache like you're 3 times your age. Your hands crack and bleed no matter how many times you rub them with pig fat. You've stopped even trying to look clean. Your cloak is a walking tapestry of stains and weather damage. You think it used to be brown, but honestly, who can say? One morning, your father slips on the porch and lands flat on his back with a sound like a sack of wet flour. He groans for a full minute, insustable, then stares at the sky and mutters, "I'll build a second house in hell just to avoid March." Your mother pretends not to hear him as she dumps another pot of grey water into the yard. The livestock are miserable. The chickens refuse to lay, and when they do, the eggs freeze solid before you can collect them. One day you find the piglet lying sideways in the muck, looking like a dropped blanket. You think it's dead until it snorts and glares at you like, how dare you assume? The goats are restless and keep trying to escape the pen. You don't blame them. If you had hooves and an ounce less shame, you'd be halfway to the next village by now. Even the fire doesn't behave. The wood is damp. It hisses and smokes but doesn't burn well. The room fills with a low, smoky haze that makes your eyes sting and your throat itch. You open a window to let it out, and immediately regret it. Cold air rushes in like it's been waiting for you to mess up. You slam the shutter closed, cough, and pretend it didn't happen. Then comes the mud. Oh, the mud. It's not just dirt, it's a living, creeping presence that infiltrates everything. The path to the well becomes a slick trail of betrayal. The yard is a churned mess of boot prints and hoof marks. Inside, the straw you put down to soak it up gets trampled into paste. You consider laying planks down, but your father says planks are for people who have extra wood, and that ain't us. Your little sister tries to make the best of it, building what she calls a mud castle by the side of the house. You're pretty sure it's just a pile of gunk with a stick in it, but you don't say anything. Let her dream. Here's a quirky historical footnote. In some regions, March was referred to as the lying month, because of its tendency to pretend winter was over while still plotting fresh snowstorms behind your back. There were even folk sayings about it, things like, March comes in like a lion and leaves like a demon chewing a frozen turnip, or something like that. You don't remember the exact words, but the sentiment is dead on. The scholars love this transition period. They write about it with terms like late frost period, or the tale of winter, like it's some graceful curtain call, but you know better. This isn't a tale, it's a final slap from a season that refuses to leave with dignity. And yet, in the middle of all this, wet boots, cracked skin, groaning livestock, you start to notice tiny, stubborn signs that change is coming. A bird singing before dawn, a patch of dirt that stays thawed all day, the sun which now lingers just a little longer in the sky, stretching the day like a cautious yawn. Your mother begins making plans, spring planting, tool sharpening. She talks about seed grain like it's treasure. Your father digs around in the shed and comes back with the old plough blade, rusted but still solid. They're not celebrating, not yet, but they're thinking about the next thing, and in winter that's its own kind of miracle. You still wake up cold, the fire still dies too early, the stew is still mostly root vegetables and guesswork, but for the first time in months, you don't dread the mornings quite as much. They're still hard but not hopeless. You start pulling your boots on faster, tightening your belt with a little more energy. You walk to the well without feeling like you're being punished for existing. It's not spring yet, not even close, but it's trying, and that's enough to keep going. There's a particular kind of hunger that settles in late winter, when supplies have dwindled, snow still falls in clumps, and your body starts whispering about things it hasn't tasted in months. Green things, juicy things, food with colour and crunch. But there's nothing left that fits that description. The cellar is a graveyard of empty jars and brittle onion skins. The salted pork smells suspicious, and the last cabbage has gone black on one side and seems to be daring you to touch it. Welcome to the true lean season. You've been rationing for weeks, but now you're out of things to ration. No more dried apples, no more cheese curls tucked in the corners of cloth. No more secret stash of hazelnuts your brother buried in a jar of oats. They're gone, eaten one by one in the middle of the night with the kind of reverence usually reserved for relics. What remains is bleak. Turnips so shriveled they look like goblin heads, beans that refuse to soften no matter how long you boil them, and a sack of barley that seems to multiply its dust content every time someone opens it. Your mother turns these scraps into meals through the power of sheer force of will. Turnip and barley mush again. Barley broth with a hint of turnip. On special days, bean surprise, which involves the same ingredients rearranged and a deeply unconvincing smile. You joke about it at first, laugh about the flavourless stew, compare the texture of boiled barley to horse spit. But after a while, the jokes stop landing. Your stomach grumbles constantly, not in sharp pangs, but in a dull, grinding ache that never really goes away. You chew slowly to trick your brain into thinking you've eaten more. You drink water between bites. You lick the spoon when no one's looking. Hunger in winter isn't theatrical. It's quiet. It creeps in slowly, settling in your bones. You don't drop weight overnight. You just become more tired, more irritable. Your cheeks hollow a little. Your belt tightens a notch. You start looking at the bread crust left behind with something dangerously close to lust. One day, you see your little sister chewing on something that looks suspiciously like tree bark. You don't even stop her. You just ask if it helps. She says it doesn't. You start to dream of food, lavish feasts, endless nibbles of roasted birds, pies dripping with berries you haven't seen since last summer, loaves of bread, so warm and soft you cry when you wake up. Then you get up, sit by the fire, and eat a bowl of barley mush that tastes like nothing and has the texture of wet sand. Your mother tightens her lips and says nothing, but you see the way she gives her portion to the baby. You see your father leave early to check the traps, even though you know the traps have been empty for days. You know he's going to chew pine twigs just to kill the gnawing in his belly. There's a term for this part of winter. The starving time. It wasn't just folklore, it was real. In some regions, it lasted from February to April, depending on how the autumn harvest went and how harsh the snow stayed. Records talk of entire villages scraping the bottom of every barrel, eating boiled leather, shoe soles and worse. You're not there yet, but you can see the edge of it. There's a boy down the road who swears he saw someone digging in the snow near the cemetery. Just looking, he said. Just checking the soil. No one says anything out loud, but everyone's thinking it. You don't want to believe it. But hunger changes people. It makes saints into scavengers, and scavengers into something darker. Even the animals grow lean. The goat's milk is watery and thin. The chickens barely peck at the grain. They know it's running low. One day the pig stops making noise entirely. Just lies there, silent, hungry, waiting. Your father runs a hand over its back and mutters, 2 more weeks. You hope he means until slaughter. You hope he doesn't mean if it lives that long. And yet the village keeps moving. People still gather at the well, trade scraps, whisper about whose firewood pile is gone, whose children have gone quiet. No one asks for help. No one offers. It's not cruelty, it's survival. You give what you can when you can, you hide what you can't, everyone understands. One strange little fact from the medieval countryside. Some people believe that eating snow could cleanse hunger. Not satisfy it, mind you, just confuse it long enough to buy time. So you try it. One morning, before anyone else is up, you sneak outside, scoop a handful of clean snow and eat it. It melts in your mouth like cold regret. You're hungrier afterward. Never again. Your mother says this is when the saints test you. That hunger is the chisel that carves your soul into something better. You want to believe that. You really do. But carving hurts, and your soul is starting to resemble one of those old turnips, scarred, dry, and barely holding together. One night your brother doesn't come home. He'd gone out to try for fish beneath the ice, just a hook, some hope, and a borrowed line. Everyone waits in silence. Your father paces. Your mother pokes the fire but doesn't add any wood. Finally, just before dawn, the door creaks open. Your brother steps in, soaked and empty-handed, but alive. Everyone exhales at once. No one asks about the fish. Still, despite all this, despite the hunger, the cold, the slow grind of days without flavour, something keeps you going. Maybe it's instinct. Maybe it's the smell of springs hiding somewhere beneath the ice. Or maybe it's just because you're too stubborn to give winter the satisfaction. You scrape your bowl clean, you pull the blanket tighter, you listen to your stomach grumble and say nothing. Tomorrow might bring more barley, but someday soon it won't. You wake to sound. Not the groaning of the wind or the crackle of the fire, not the soft snore of a goat curled by the hearth, but something different, sharp, bright, fast, water, dripping. Somewhere just outside the shutter, it's tapping a rhythm you haven't heard in months. At first, your sleep-hazed brain assumes something's gone wrong. A leak, a spill. But then it hits you, slow and warm and impossible. The ice is melting. And you blink your eyes open and stare at the low ceiling beams, coated with soot and memory. There's still frost in the corners of the room, still cold air wrapped around your ankles like a persistent ghost. But beneath it all, there's a hum, a low whisper in the bones of the house. Change. You stumble outside, boots unlaced and shirt half-buttoned, not caring who sees. The yard is a mess. It's a patchwork of grey snow, black mud and puddles so reflective you half expect to fall into the sky. The air smells different too. Not sweet exactly, but wet. Living. You breathe in, and it tastes like soil thawing, like grass about to wake up, like hope with a hint of mould. The sun, not that dim, washed-out winter imitation, but the real thing, burns weakly through the haze. Your shadow returns to your feet like a loyal dog that's been hiding for months. You stand there grinning like a fool until your sister chucks a half-melted snowball at your head and ruins the moment. Welcome to the start of the thaw. Not quite spring, not quite winter, but something wobbly and in between. The world doesn't erupt into green overnight. It oozes into it, slips, drips, crawls. Snow melts from rooftops in steady streams. Icicles fall one by one with tiny vicious plinks. The once solid yard becomes a bog that sucks at your boots and threatens to devour anyone under 70 pounds. The animals are confused. The chickens wander outside, eyes squinted against the watery sun, pecking suspiciously at the ground like they're not convinced it's real. The goat steps gingerly into the slush, lets out a long, theatrical bleat, and retreats inside with great indignation. You don't blame her. Your own boots are filled with what feels like icy porridge. Inside, the mood shifts. It's subtle, but real. People laugh a little more. The silences around the fire shrink. Your mother hums again while stirring the pot. Not a song, just a tuneless thread of sound that says her mind isn't entirely trapped in the present anymore. Your father starts sharpening tools. Your brother gets into a long argument with a chicken, which ends with him giving it a name. No one questions that. Even the stew tastes better. Not because the ingredients have changed, but because your tongue remembers how to feel joy. You scrape the pot clean and feel a little less like an empty container. But the thaw brings its own dangers. The mud is treacherous. It hides holes, rocks, tools you lost 3 months ago. One afternoon you nearly lose a boot in the muck and spend 10 minutes trying to dig it out with a stick while your sister laughs from a safe distance. Another day you slip and land flat on your back in a puddle that smells like chicken and regret. Water gets into everything. Your bedding is damp. The walls sweat. The ceiling leaks in places you didn't know could leak. You place pots and wooden bowls in strategic locations to catch the drips, and by morning they're full. Your mother blames the roof, your father blames last autumn's thatching. You blame winter for being petty on its way out. But no one really complains, because all the dripping, squelching, sloshing misery means one glorious truth. The frost is giving up, slowly, bitterly, but still. Here's a peculiar little medieval ritual. In some villages, people would gather on the first day of noticeable melt and beat the snow with sticks. Literally march outside and wallop snowbanks with branches, yelling things like, "Be gone, old man winter," he'd said, and wake earth. You used to think it sounded silly. But after months of white silence and frozen everything, you completely understand the impulse to commit stick-based violence against slush. You try it, quietly, behind the house. Just one good swing at a snowbank. It collapses with a satisfying whoomp. You grin. It's better than stew. Still, not everything survives the thaw. The barn door sags. A bucket you left under the eaves has cracked clean through. You find the old sled half rotted, its iron runners rusted from too many months buried. And there, in the corner of the yard, lies the piglet, too small to last the cold. No one talks about it. Your father buries it at dusk, under a soft drizzle of melting snow. Spring doesn't rescue everything, but it promises something. That's enough. Scholars like to debate whether medieval people mark the start of spring by the calendar, the church, or the sky. The truth? You mark it when you feel it. When the snow begins to groan beneath your feet. When the first drops slide off the edge of the roof and hit you square in the eye. When the chicken starts squabbling again and someone mutters that it's nearly time to clean the tools. That's spring. Not flowers, not sunshine, sound, motion, change. The fire still burns at night, but it's not your only lifeline anymore. The house doesn't feel like a coffin, just a shelter, one of many. You find yourself outside more, even when it's muddy and miserable. You let the sun touch your face even when it's weak. You dig your fingers into the thawing earth just to remember what dirt feels like that isn't frozen solid. You start thinking about planting. Not just seeds, but ideas, dreams. Maybe you'll try growing something new this year. Maybe you'll explore beyond the ridge. Maybe you'll finally build that second goat pen your father keeps promising. The world feels wide again, even if it's still cold. For now, the days stretch, the shadows move, the snow melts. And you're still here. There's a certain kind of mess that only spring in a medieval village can make. It's not just the puddles or the scattered twigs or the endless swirls of half-melted animal dung, though those all contribute in impressive quantities. No, the real mess is the chaos that comes when everything starts moving again, all at once, like a long frozen scene has suddenly hit fast forward. The snow might still be patchy in places, but the village has declared winter over, whether the weather agrees or not, which means it's time to clean. Now, you've heard of spring cleaning, sure, but medieval spring cleaning isn't about sweeping out clutter or reorganising your sock chest. It's about survival. If your house doesn't air out, it moulds. If your tools don't get scrubbed and sharpened, they break. If the waste that built up all winter doesn't get cleared, someone's going to step in something foul, and that someone is almost always barefoot. Your mother starts the campaign with terrifying efficiency. One morning, before the roosters even bothered to crow, she flings open the door and announces, "Everything out!" That includes blankets, cloaks, boots, tools, food barrels, children, and one very surprised chicken who'd taken up residence behind the hearth. Out it goes, squawking indignantly. Out you go, blinking at the pale grey sky like a mole dragged into daylight. The first task is shaking the bedding. Not a gentle flutter, mind you. This is full-body warfare with straw-stuffed sacks that haven't seen sunlight since November. You drag them outside, beat them with sticks, hang them over the fence, and watch clouds of dust and other things pour into the air. You try not to think about what's been living in there. Your brother finds a beetle the size of a walnut. Your sister finds what might be part of a mouse. Next comes the scrubbing. Every pot, every bowl, every wooden spoon that didn't crack from cold or split from heat gets dunked in water that's somehow both steaming hot and cruelly cold. Your fingers go numb in seconds, but you keep going, because the alternative is letting your mother scrub your ears out of spite. Then it's time to deal with the pile. You know the one. The semi-permanent heap of ash, straw, bones and mystery goo that's built up just outside the door all winter long. It's technically supposed to be shoveled weekly, In reality, it's become a kind of landmark, possibly sentient, possibly vengeful. Your father approaches it with a pitchfork and the solemn air of someone going into battle. It takes 3 days to get the smell off your hands, and just when you think it's over, when the floor's been brushed, the fire's been relit, the pots are gleaming, and the house smells less like goat, your mother announces the next stage: lice combing. You freeze, because you forgot. You'd been pretending you were done. But no, winter meant hats, blankets, hoods, and hours of communal huddling. And all of that means lice. They thrive in warmth and dirt, and you, my friend, are prime real estate. So you sit by the fire as your mother parts your hair with the cruelest little comb ever devised, and mutters darkly every time she finds one of the little beasts. You try not to cry, you fail. Here's a little-known fact. Some medieval people kept lice deliberately, especially in religious communities, believing they were part of the holy suffering of the body. Others took it as a sign of resilience. You take it as a sign that you've shared a blanket with someone far less hygienic than you'd hoped. The villagers are busy now, each in their own battle against the aftershocks of winter. You see neighbours scrubbing soot from walls, patching hairmoot thatch, dumping buckets of grey water into the ditches that now run with half-melted slush and a suspicious amount of chicken feathers. The air is filled with smoke, steam, and the smell of wet wool and soaproot. There's a strange energy to it. Not joy exactly, joy's too big and too early, but movement, momentum. People stretch their limbs like bears waking up. They argue louder, laugh sharper. Old men sit in doorways and comment on how the sun feels different. Young children wander the village barefoot for the first time in months, immediately stepping into things they shouldn't. And of course there are casualties. The blacksmith's boy breaks his arm falling from a slick fence. One of the older women strains her back trying to lift a water barrel on her own. You sprain your ankle slipping on a patch of ice you shoveled. Your mother says you're lucky it didn't break. You say you're lucky to be alive at all. She rolls her eyes. Scholars call this the interstitial season, the gap between winter's grip and spring's bloom, but you just call it the mud month. Because it is. Mud is everywhere. In your clothes, your boots, your mouth, after a particularly poorly timed sneeze near the pig pen. You dream about dry ground like it's some long-lost paradise. You forget what solid footing feels like. Still, even with the mud and mess, something lightens, the air for one. It doesn't bite as hard. The wind smells a little less like ice and more like things that grow. You start to notice birds returning, little ones that flit around the edges of the trees, chirping like they've got gossip. A bee buzzes past your ear one morning and your first reaction is to swat it. Your second is to cry. You didn't realise how much you'd missed bees. You sit outside at dusk one evening, watching the sun dip behind the hills and realise you're not shivering. That alone feels like a miracle. Your hands are dry and cracked, your boots are still damp, and the firewood pile is nearly gone. But for the first time in months you can see the end of it. The season, the struggle, the dark. It's not finished, not by a long shot. There'll still be frost, still be hunger, still be setbacks. But the earth has shifted. You feel it under your feet, in your bones, in the way people have started to speak with the next week in their sentences again. The clean-up continues, so does life. And in the middle of it all, you realise you survived the winter. Not easily, not cleanly, but you did. You'd think after all that, the final days of winter would feel triumphant, like crossing the finish line of some long, freezing, muddy race. But instead, it feels more like waking up after a long, feverish dream and realising the house is still messy. The work is still piled high, and your legs don't quite remember how to run. There's no parade, no shining gate to spring, just the slow, persistent unravelling of the cold season's grip and the return of everything winter forced into hiding. Your neighbours, the weeds, your own ambition. It starts with the ground, not with flowers or birdsong or anything dramatic, but with dirt. Honest, wet, sticky, worm-streaked dirt. Your father digs a finger into it and nods like it's given him a secret. Soon, he mutters, though whether he's speaking to the earth or himself, you don't know. Everyone's looking at the fields now. They're not ready, still too sodden, too splotched with patches of stubborn frost. But the planning has begun. You hear it in whispered numbers. Bushels, rows, tools. You see it in the way people examine the sky, looking not for signs, but for stability. The sun is rising earlier now. Not by much, but enough that your chores feel less like a punishment and more like a rhythm you might one day enjoy again. Your mother folds a worn scrap of parchment with this year's planting plan, adjusting lines with a charcoal nub. The whole thing looks like a child's drawing, but to her, it's life itself. Barley in the back field, cabbages near the fence, peas wherever the chickens haven't completely ruined the soil. You hover nearby, pretending not to be interested, but when she offers you a corner to sketch your own ideas, you pretend not to care while gripping the charcoal like a knight grips a sword. Meanwhile, the animals have returned to being annoying. The goat's milk has come back in full force, and the pig once again thinks every chore is a group activity. You try to fix the chicken fence and are immediately mobbed by 5 hens who seem convinced you're hiding a secret stash of seed. You're not. If you were, you'd have eaten it. That's the thing, they're hungry too. You can see it in how they scratch at empty patches of earth, how the dog growls over even the smallest bone. You're all coming out of the lean time together, barely. You're thinner. The animals are thinner. The dog's fur has gone patchy, and your own hair seems to have decided now is the time to fall out in stress-related tufts. But you're all standing. That counts. Then come the aches. The real ones. The ones that had gone quiet during the cold, tucked away under layers of numbness, only to roar back now that your blood remembers how to move. Your joints complain, your knees creak like the barn door. You've never been so aware of your own feet. Their cracks and blisters, and the way the soles feel like leather someone's tried to cook. You meet others at the well again. Not just the same 5 people you saw all winter, but everyone. They've emerged like badgers from burrows, blinking in the sunlight, comparing notes on who lost what. Old Marta says she's missing a sheep. Joanne's boy broke his hand in a woodpile collapse. The healer came down with something and was half unconscious for days. No one noticed because she hadn't been answering the door all winter. She's fine now, mostly. Pale and grumpy, but fine. You try not to ask about the ones you don't see, because even now, even in this edge of spring chapter, death still lingers. There are houses with doors still closed, plots of land not being readied, fire pits not smoking. People don't talk about it directly, but they nod toward those houses and their eyes go quiet. The priest mumbles extra names during Mass. That's how you know. Still, life wins by sheer stubbornness. The children, somehow, are already running barefoot again. The first truly warm day hits and half the village is outside stripping off layers like it's midsummer. You laugh at your brother for sunning himself on a rock like a lizard. 10 minutes later you join him. And finally something green appears. It's small, humble, a single shoot poking through the muck beside the fence. You stare at it like it's a miracle, because it is, not because it's rare, but because it means you are right to believe you'd live long enough to see it. You call your sister over. She squeals and names it Francis. You don't correct her. The whole family takes turns crouching to look. Even your father gives it a respectful nod. Francis is joined by others, little stubborn signs, dandelions, onion grass, bits of moss, a patch of crocuses near the chapel that sprout like purple fire. Suddenly everything is waking up, you included. A fringe belief you once heard comes to mind. Some said spring couldn't arrive until a child whispered their name into the earth. A little poetic nonsense maybe, but it stays with you. That night you sneak outside and whisper your own name into the muddy soil, just in case the wind is warm on your face, and you think it smiles. And here's the thing, you won. You somehow did what the season tried very hard to prevent. You stayed fed enough, warm enough, dry enough, loved enough. You managed. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't noble, but it was real. You survived the medieval winter. And now you get to live. So here you are, mud on your boots, sun on your face, the memory of winter still clinging to your bones like the last crust of frost on a shaded stone. You've made it through something people don't really survive alone. Because in a medieval winter, survival isn't about heroism. It's about community, improvisation, timing, and a little bit of quiet, cold-blooded luck. You saw the food stores vanish one ladleful at a time. You watched your own hands split and bleed in the cold. You shared fire with the same 5 bodies for months and learned their coughs, their snoring patterns, and the way they shift in sleep when nightmares come. You mourned losses without ceremony. You watched death pass by your door, sometimes pausing long enough to remind you that he knew the way. And you endured. And for what? This, the sound of trickling water, the smell of thawing dirt, the aching, groaning, glorious return of life. Not in grand declarations, but in puddles and birdsong. in a rooster that crows just a little too early, and a sister who dances barefoot in the mud because she doesn't care who's watching. It's not a clean ending. Your cloak still smells like smoke. Your firewood pile is laughably low. There's still snow tucked in the corners of the woods, waiting to make your socks miserable. But you've stepped into the part of the story where things begin again. The soil's soft. The seeds are ready. Your body still aches, but now it aches with purpose. There's work to be done, yes, but it's not the desperate scrambling of survival anymore. It's the work of living, planting, of fixing, rebuilding, hoping. You have a name again, not just a role. You're not just the forager or the wood hauler or the one who doesn't cry when the goat kicks. You're you, and you're still here. Take a breath. Let the cold finally leave your lungs. You survived the medieval winter. Now go grow something beautiful.